Good morning, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. We're going to continue our series looking at Tommy McMurtry and Revelation 1. So this is part 6 of an eschatology series that I'm doing. And so we looked at Steven Anderson and his video on Revelation chapter 1. So I thought I'd jump to Tommy McMurtry's Revelation 1 video. Rather than do, all of Steven Anderson's 22 videos, I thought, well, I'll just stick with Revelation 1, constantly go over Revelation 1 with some of these new IFB guys. Now, I might even jump to some of these other guys like Alan Kirshner and others who have a similar eschatology. But we're just going to continue going through this. And so last time we finished off about the 22-minute mark, 23-minute mark, I think it was. And so I might just rewind this just a tiny bit. Actually, no, I have set that up properly. So let's just start going through this.
But that is just foolish right there. But let's look at a few verses, all right? Let's look at some verses on the return of Christ and just watch for these things, all right? If it's talking about clouds, it's the rapture.
So we talked about this last time. If it's talking about clouds, it's the rapture. Okay, so if we go to Revelation 11, it clearly talks about certain aspects. Now I'll just go through this. Okay, so it was talking about clouds, it's talking about the rapture. Okay, so here we have these two witnesses, and it says, after 3.5 days, the Spirit of life from God entered into them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them. And they heard a great voice from heaven saying, "Come up hither." And they ascended up into heaven in a cloud. Oh, that must be the rapture then. See, this is the thing. This is a rapture, but it's not the rapture. And so this is one of the problems with just, putting the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle all together and in a cluster and saying, well, see, they're the same picture. And like I was saying, a lot of the time, what these guys are doing with the book of Revelation, see, the book of Revelation is a chronological timeline. Now, it does have some historical information, just like if you were talking about any type of story, you would have to have some sort of reference back to the past at some stage. You might introduce a new character, and so you have to sort of say, well, this guy came from here and did this and did that. But it's very small, that amount of information. Most of it is just to do with the chronological sequence of the 7 years, the 70th week of Daniel. And so here we have these two guys. They get raptured up, and it says there's a cloud. So do I just go, oh, well, this must be the rapture that Tommy McMurtry believes in, the rapture that he conflates the second coming mentioned in Matthew 24. He says that that's the rapture instead of the end of the 7 years. He says it's at the beginning of not the beginning of the 7 years, but he believes it's sort of like a mid-trib sort of thing, following Steven Anderson's chart. But it's got a cloud there. And so this is one of the problems with their position. They're just like, oh, it's got a cloud, so it must be it. And I just feel that this is very sloppy because, like I mentioned this in our debate together, that clouds are very common things in the sky. Now, usually, whenever someone is coming or going from heaven, there are clouds involved. There are, Jesus was taken up, ascended up into heaven in a cloud, and so it's not a strange thing to see a story about someone getting harpazoed or raptured up or taken up or brought down, and there's clouds. And so that's it doesn't mean that every story involving clouds is the same. That's what these guys are saying. And so I think that's just a fallacy. Now, I'm not saying that that's not something that you should look at, It's something that you should go, okay, well, yeah, there's clouds here, but why aren't they saying this is the rapture then? Clearly, it says, they stood on their feet, and it says a great voice from heaven saying to them, come up hither, and they ascended up into heaven in a cloud. So why aren't they saying that this is the rapture? And their enemies beheld them. So that I could just say, well, only 2 people were left, raptured. That's it. That was the rapture. You know what I mean? Like, I just find a lot of this comparison stuff, some people, what they do, it's a bit like when, these guys tend to use the term New World Order. It seems like an Alex Jones sort of term. It must be a popular thing in the United States, where it's like the New World Order. Now, to me, the whole concept of New World Order being this sort of mysterious thing from the Book of Revelation, well, I mean, tons of heavy metal songs sing about the New World Order. I remember back in the 90s, there was songs about the New World Order coming from heavy metal bands and things like that. And it's like, is it really this mysterious, New World Order thing? And at the end of the day, you get people who, it seems like these guys follow the Tex Mars route. And so it just seems like that's where Anderson got a lot of his information. And having Tex Mars being a part of the Marching to Zion video, you would see that this is where they would conclude. So some people say, oh, the Jews, they rule the world, But then you get other people say, oh, no, the Jesuits rule the world. Then you get other people say, oh, no, the CIA rules the world. And you got other people, oh, no, it's the international bankers in Europe, they rule the world. And then it's, the royal family, they rule the world. And so there's all these different types of leaders that rule the world, But then there's the Black Pope, and, so it's not officially the Vatican. Then there's the Illuminati, of course, and then there's the Bilderbergers. And, these guys, you don't really see Anderson and these other guys exposing like Alex Jones, because he is an advertising tool for these guys. And the thing is, Alex Jones is going to be selling prepper kits for the tribulation period, because he believes the pre-trib rapture is wrong. And so he's been sucked into all this. And so he's selling, prepper kits. You can buy them on his website. You can buy his vitamins. You can go on the website and stock up on vitamins, stock up on prepper kits, and buy shovels and all sorts of things to dig holes during the tribulation period, and all this stuff. But what I find is these guys use terminology that it just depends on which group you're talking to. So if you talk to one group, they're like, it's all the Jews. You talk to another group, they're like, it's all the Catholics. And another group, oh, it's all the Muslims. And another group, oh, it's the royal family and the CIA, And so it's quite interesting. Now, I think if you go down any of those routes, you will find, certain evidences that point towards people having influence and power and things like that. But why am I bringing that up? Well, it just seems like these guys sort of default to, it's the Jewish problem. Okay, that's what they default to. Now, some people I've been researching this a little bit. There's a guy called Brian Dellinger. Okay. So I don't agree with Brian Dellinger's material, 100% or anything like that. It's just like if I was to watch some random guy on YouTube, it doesn't mean I'm endorsing what they're saying. But he comes against these guys. So obviously they're going to say things that are, yes, correct. These guys are going to say things that are correct against Brian Dellinger. Brian Dellinger is going to say some things that are correct against these guys, or both of them are going to say things wrong. I sort of found Dellinger's, he believes in pre-tribulation rapture, but he would disagree with me on multiple things. There were so many things that he was like, you're a bit of a dimwit if you don't understand this and understand that. And I'm like, well, I do understand it, but I'm not adopting your position. And so I would disagree with his type of pre-trib material. And so, so these guys, what they've done is they've just chosen a specific group of people to blame, and Dellinger seems to just blame the Jesuits. Okay. So why have I brought that up? Well, in the same way, what I find is what these guys do is they get certain scriptures. Some people get the certain scriptures that say clouds, okay? They marry all them up and say, see, they're the same event. Other people get the word trumpet and say, oh, it's the last trumpet. It's to do with this trumpet and that trumpet. And they line it all up and go, see, that's where the rapture is going to happen. Other people, they do it with other, key words, and, they might be looking for, the sun and moon turning to darkness. And that's the sort of gravity point that they're they're navigating around, they're circling around that gravity point and formulating their eschatology around that. And so if they have that point out of whack, their whole eschatology is going to be off. And so that's what I pointed out in the debate between myself and Tommy McMurtry, is they're saying the sun will be turned to darkness and the moon will be turned to blood. Well, that's, in Joel, then it says, and then the day of the Lord shall come. And I was pointing out that when they read in Matthew where it says that the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give her light, that's not saying the moon will be turned to blood. There are other passages in Revelation that talk about the sun being darkened and the moon being darkened. So why are they only just specifically saying it's the moon to blood one when it doesn't mention the blood in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21? It doesn't mention the blood moon at all. And so, and that's another one. People go blood moons and the moon, and so. But the thing is, I'm not saying I'm against doing those type of things. But what I see is some people, they override everything else because of their favorite one. So if they have in their mind the last trumpet is when that's when Christ comes. So they just get the book of Revelation, get a Strong's Concordance, go, oh, trumpet, that's when the rapture happens, or either the pre-trib rapture or the post-trib rapture, whatever type of rapture you want. It's like, well, that appears at that trumpet. Or I'll get these clouds and line them all up. That's why all these fit together. Or I get, name it. That there's many things that occur, and these guys are lining them all up in a row. But that doesn't mean that these are related. Now, we should study those things. We should look at those. We should consider these things. But we shouldn't just get one opinion and make that our focal point. And like I was saying, circle around that like gravity, in a sense where these guys get their timing wrong because of, after the tribulation, and then they go into the blood moon prophecy, but the blood moon prophecy is not mentioned in the Gospels. And so that's why they're actually, in the Gospels, it's talking about the second half of the 7 years. But they put it forward and put it into Revelation chapter 6 because they mistakenly think that is to do with the blood moon issue. So they're twisting things around. So some things they're very adamant at saying this is a cloud, here's another cloud, and they're very strict on all that. But as I pointed out here, they're not strict on these two witnesses that they have a cloud too. Why isn't that part of it, But then other people like, no, the trumpets, lining up all the trumpets. Other people are, it's the stars. Some people are the sun. Some people the moon. But if you get these things wrong, you've got to get all these things right. And you've got to not circle around these things. What you've got to circle around is the timeline of the book of Revelation. From chapter 4, verse 1, all the way through to chapter 19 is a 7-year period, with chapter 13 being the midway point of 3.5 years. Understanding that simple timeline, then when you're collecting this information, then you can put, okay, where does this blood moon thing fit in? Okay, where does the tribulation that Jesus talked about fit in? The specific one that he's talking about in Matthew 24, where does that fit in? There are other tribulations, but it's all called, there are great tribulations that happen in that period of time. But he's specifically talking about in that period of time, in the 7 years, in the prophecy of Daniel, that because after the abomination of desolation, that's when it's talking about Matthew 24, run to the hills and do all this other stuff. And so in a pre-trib timeline, it fits perfectly. In their timeline, you, like I was saying with a puzzle, they're getting all the pictures of trees and stacking them up on top of each other and saying, see, they fit. And it's like, look, I can see the same picture on it. I can see the cloud there. But just stacking them on top of each other, it's not creating a picture. And then all they do is talk about that, and I find they talk about a lot of unnecessary things too, talking about the word tribulation and saying that believers are going to go through tribulations. It's like, why are you constantly equating daily tribulations with the Great Tribulation? Now, I know there is terminology that we have adopted from our forefathers that just to make things easier, it's like, okay, well, that's the period of the Great Tribulation. Okay. So then you get people who go, oh, well, we believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. We won't go through that period of tribulation. But then these guys are like, well, you're calling the whole thing tribulation. You're equating that with wrath. And it's like, well, no, we can be specific there, but we're specifically talking about the wrath of God's getting poured out on the earth. Tribulation is not something that's from God here. Tribulation is something from man. So, it's so when you go through it, these guys are not using, like when you get any game, if you were to play Monopoly, you read the rules. And one of the things is a lot of people actually play Monopoly and they don't play according to the rules. You have your own family rules, and so sometimes you'll be playing against your cousins or something like that, and they're like, no, you're able to just buy up, if you land on something, you're able to buy it, and even if someone else owns it, if it's mortgaged, you can buy it all. They just make up their rules. I'm not sure if I haven't played Monopoly for so long, but the thing is, these IFB guys, they're making up their own rules. They're making up their own standards. The Bible has a standard. The Bible clearly says that the things which will be hereafter, that's talking about the future period of the book of Revelation. So that whole period is the hereafter. See, they want to muddle that up and say one of the key things that they want to do is make sure that you don't think that Revelation is a chronological sequence. Now, they'll even claim that it's a chronological sequence, but then they'll not use it as a chronological sequence. And so instead of just reading the text from chapter 4, verse 1, all the way through to the end, chapter 19, and going, okay, well, that's a 7-year period. That's the 7th week of Daniel. That's the time of Jacob's trouble. That's, and looking at all those things, what they do is they go, oh, well, you have to fold the whole thing in half, and then, the seals go for this long and stretching out here. And it's, Book of Revelation is not a pizza dough that you're stretching out and folding out and laying upon each other. And it's not like that. And so they get the seals and the vials and they join them all together and, say, well, these are the same events. And it just doesn't fit. So, and no one in their right mind would think that they are the same events. If you were just to read through it like a chronological sequence, you would go, okay, well, this happened, then that happened, then that happened. And so this is one of the things that Tommy McMurtry said in his earlier videos. He's like, if you think that it just says, okay, this happened, and then that happened, and then that happened, you're thinking wrong. What's happening is he's just being shown a vision. Sometimes he's being shown things that happen earlier on, sometimes things later on, sometimes things in the middle, but it's all over the place. And so I don't know. For the life of me, I don't know why God would do that. If this was true, why would God do that? It's just so utterly confusing. And then you need a guru. Then you need a guru to come and teach you and say to you, okay, well, Revelation chapter 11 is the millennium, and we have to fold everything over each other, and then Christ coming on a horse. Oh, that's not the second coming of Christ, and all this sort of stuff. So it just gets into bizarro land, which I'm thinking more and more. The more that I look at this, I just see it as bizarre. So one thing I just want to quickly look at, I'm just going to go to YouTube. Now, Brian Dellinger and Trib. Just look this up. I saw a video the other day, and it was quite amazing. Now, as I said, I don't agree with the guy on several things, but he did have some very good books. Sure. Okay. I can never find this when it comes up in my feed all the time, and then when I really want it, I can't find it. Okay, post-trib rapture. I better make sure I'm spelling his name right. How do you do? Okay, post-trib rapture. I'll write like exposed or something. Okay, so what I might do, I might just search for that on the side as we're going through some of this stuff. And then when I find it, I'll bring it to the fore. Okay, so let's let Tommy continue.
If it's talking about a horse, it's Armageddon. All right. So Revelation 4, and also in Armageddon, he comes on a horse.
So this thing, if it's talking about a horse, it's Armageddon. As I mentioned in the previous videos that I've done, I mean, even the Dead Kennedys sing a song, California Uberalis, and they say the white horseman is near, talking about an antichrist, because it's just popular teachings. I mean, Catholics believe that. It's the Antichrist. And I'm all my Christianity, when I've heard this, I've just gone, okay, so why is that the Antichrist? Oh, because it's a horse and it's white and it's not Jesus. And it's like, okay, so that makes it an Antichrist. So they're like, it's the Antichrist, But to me, it's just a horse. Like, it's like these guys going, see, it's a gray horse. That means it's the false prophet. You mentioned it, it's like, no. It's just the first horse is a white horse. Second horse, it's the four horsemen of the apocalypse. But these guys are adamant, no, that's the Antichrist, because it has to fit in with their eschatology. And this is where these guys are adamant about it. They'll hit the table about it, sort of thing, where I'm just like, okay, well, I'm not saying it's 100% sure that it's not the Antichrist. I'm just saying it doesn't say that it's the Antichrist. And so, but these guys are like, don't you think the Antichrist is going to appear straight away? And it's like, well, that doesn't mean that it's a horse here. It doesn't mean there's going to be lots of things that happen. There's going to be, cashless society and all sorts of things happen during this time. Perhaps it just doesn't get mentioned till Revelation chapter 13. But see, that's where they get Revelation 13 and put it into Revelation 6. It's like, they just twist everything. But I don't like it when people just read into scripture and they mention things that simply just aren't there. He's like, so it's a horse, Jesus coming, and there's a horse in Revelation 6. They're the same. Oh, okay, so I guess the four horsemen, there's four horses. They're all Jesus, are they? They're all representations of Jesus, and they're all anti-Jesus, antichrist. So it's just, like I was saying, they're getting the pieces of the puzzle and stacking them up, but sometimes they're leaving pieces and going, it's like, isn't that a tree as well? Oh, we don't deal with that one. And so that's why it's messy and it's not 100%. And, it's a white horse. So you got a white Jesus there. Yep, that's it. That must be the Antichrist, It's related to Christ.
And he's coming with his saints, right? He's coming with his saints. So in 1 Thessalonians 4:16 says, "For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord." Rapture or Armageddon. All right, that's rapture. We're in the clouds. Look at this one, Jude 1:14. "And Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints, to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds which they have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches which ungodly sinners have spoken against him." So which one's that? That's Armageddon. Okay? Matthew 20.
So it seems, so they have a rapture and Armageddon. So instead of having, the pre-trib is, you have the rapture, and then you have, the second coming of Christ. These guys have the rapture and then Armageddon. And so they have these two separate events. And it's so strange because what they've basically done is they've just gotten 3 or 4 major texts that talk about the actual second coming of Christ, when Christ comes to the earth and gathers everyone to himself. And they've just made them the rapture. They've just converted them into the rapture. So it's just confused everything. So that's why sometimes he'll be mentioning something and I'll go to a reference of it, but then go, actually, they changed that one as well. I'll go to another reference of it and go, well, they actually changed that one as well. And so you're sort of left, you're playing basketball on a soccer field. You're like, which direction do I throw this ball? It's just utter confusion. And what I find, some of these guys, Alan Kirshner does this. He knows that the pre-trib guys have their own boundaries and rules, and they have, okay, at this end we have the rapture, at the other end we have the second coming. And what he does is he likes to throw out his concepts and say, see, you guys are stupid. You think this verse is saying this when it's not. And it's like, well, yeah, according to your paradigm, according to your rules, according to your diagrams, it's not. And so you have to sort of understand their whole rules and the whole picture, because you can't really get, someone who's a pre-trib guy and just prove them wrong on one point and expect them to go, oh, okay, well, yeah, I'll just throw out all my pre-trib stuff and just adopt their material, because they're showing you a completely different game. They're showing you something that is so foreign, it's so different, that there's 20 different concepts. You're looking in a totally different direction. You're reading the book of Revelation like you've never read it before. You're reading Matthew 24 like you've never read it before. There are so many issues that are brought up with this, that at the end of the day, so just had Praisey I Am said, I've lost my salvation for not having at 2 viewers. I've lost my salvation for not having at 2 viewers. Okay, so I'm not really getting what you're saying there. But and so the having an eschatology like they do, it's a bit like say a Seventh-day Adventist just proving you wrong on the Sabbath issue. Okay, so they come along and they're like, no, you should really worship on a Saturday. They're not telling you about the mark of the beast situation that they believe. They're not telling you about the whole concept of you should not eat meat or else you'll be sexually perverted. They're not telling you that Jesus came invisibly in 1844. They're not telling you all this sort of stuff. And so just by proving you on one point, you're just sort of like, okay. But at the end of the day, there's 20 different points that these guys are trying to, they're trying to push you in a certain direction. But oftentimes I just find someone like Alan Kirshner, he'll just try and get you on this one point. But at the end of the day, this one point isn't, it still just doesn't help. It's like, and the only people who would really be challenged by that are people who don't understand the pre-trib position from knowing it from the scriptures. So I can understand people say, well, these pre-trib guys, they've watched the Left Behind movie or they've read the Left Behind books. And so now if your theology is so thin that you get persuaded by a movie, by some sort of Hollywood movie on Left Behind, then you're going to be easily persuaded. Now, if a Catholic comes along and says their eschatology, you'll probably jump into their camp. I'm sure there's tons of Catholics who go, well, I used to be a pre-trib guy, and now I'm a Catholic or whatever. I'm sure maybe even Hank Hengraf, who's become Orthodox, maybe he was a pre-trib guy. I have no idea. But the thing is, most of these pre-tribbers have no eschatology. They're just following their church. They're just going, well, the pastor said it. And so what I find is people are just jumping on bandwagons. The Bible says in the last days, they heap up for themselves teachers. Now, we all do this to a certain extent. We find someone with something that we enjoy. We go down the rabbit trail of following them. But we've really got to ask ourselves the question, is it biblical? And I know a lot of people will follow someone like Chuck Missler, and I've, watched Chuck Missler's stuff, but there's, him and the whole Nephilim thing is ridiculous. But he's a pre-trib guy. But what I find is, say someone like Stephen Anderson, someone like Alan Kirshner, these guys, their eschatology is very complicated. It's very confusing. It's not something that you would just come up with if you were just handed a Bible and a bunch of good dictionaries and you were able to just read this for yourself. You wouldn't come up with the timelines that these guys have. The timeline that I have is just reading through from chapter to the next chapter to the next chapter. We're in chapter 13 of Revelation. We're halfway through. And then you would continue on. And what I find is, even all the studies that I've done into Revelation 16:5, they don't fit with this eschatology, because this eschatology is based upon new Bible versions. Like, say, Alan Kirshner, he is using modern Bibles. So he's saying Revelation chapter 11 is the millennium, which, if it says the one which was and is to come in the King James, well, Jesus hasn't come yet. But their Bible says which was and is. It omits is to come. That's how they can have the millennium there. People who follow the Textus Receptus in the King James, they have no place of saying that that's the millennium. But that's what I find is a lot of these places are where modern Bibles have ruined eschatology. And so the same issue appears in Revelation chapter 5, where we have we are kings and priests. Throw down their crowns. So they're already crowned. When you look at when you study crowns, we get them. We're going to be raptured and get crowns. So they've already thrown their crowns down, and then it says we will reign. We are kings and priests. And it's talking about us, we. But in the modern Bibles, it says they, them. And so we can see the modern Bibles don't have a pre-trib crowd saying those things, but the King James does. And so this is the problem. If you're going to get information, borrow information, steal information from people, you've got to make sure that what these people are saying is correct. And you've got to at least look up those scriptures in a reliable Bible. You know, you can't just go, okay, well, like I know James White says some pretty decent things about the Catholics, you know, so he might do a whole study on Mariolatry. And I've listened to his stuff on that and I've thought, wow, that's really good. But I don't just, you know, verbatim go, you know, this and that, because I know there's some verses that he would go to that are different in the King James, and some arguments that he bases upon readings in the ESV and the NIV and on the critical text. So if I'm to make those same arguments, people would just easily point out, well, you've actually borrowed that from this guy instead of getting it from the Bible. And so anyway, so yeah, Praise I Am says least. So you've lost your salvation for not having at least 2 viewers. Well, I was saying to a guy this morning, if I actually just believe in the once saved, always saved position, so just say I took 5 minutes out of my time and went, okay, guys, I believe what you guys believe. I'm once saved, always saved. You guys go, yay. And then I go, but in 5 minutes, I'm going to revert back. Am I still saved 5 minutes later? You know, because I'm apparently not saved now because I don't preach the gospel, apparently. But what if I was once saved, always saved? You know, is Benny Hinn, if he, you know, was once saved, always saved at one stage and then went, no, I don't believe with that, and he went off and become a heretic, is he still saved? How many people have done this, have become once saved, always saved, and then left that, but they're still saved, apparently, you know? So Bold as a Lion says, hey, I'm here. Standing for Truth. Hey, Donnie. Here, I'll help Nick get his salvation back by being the second viewer at Praise. Yeah, these, I find doing videos on the IFB guys is not really popular. Probably the least popular thing that I'm doing. I guess people just have no interest in the IFB eschatology stuff. Except for those who are in those circles. And so, but I really want to go through it, iron out these issues, show people where there's error. And so that's what I'm doing. Bold as a Lion, them tube is just a liar since you know who bought them. Them tube. Okay, so I'm not really sure what that means, Bold as a Lion, but kept pure in all ages. So I'm pretty sure that's Christian McCaffrey. If a Calvinist starts watching, does Nick automatically get eternal security? Well, I guess you would believe in perseverance of the saints, being a Calvinist. And so, but let's just continue with what Tommy's saying here.
24:29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days.
I wish I had $1 for every time I heard that. Immediately after the tribulation in those days. And then it says the sun will be darkened, sun and moon will be darkened. Doesn't say anything about the moon being turned to blood there. Revelation, after Revelation chapter 6 and 7, it talks about the sun and moon being darkened as well. And so there are... And I think John at the beginning was writing down like, okay, like imagine if you're watching the world collapse and fall to bits. And there are times when every place is shaken and all the rest of it, and all the buildings are falling down. And you would think there'd be a bit of darkness happening. Like, I mean, look at the dust of 9/11, you know, all the buildings that collapsed. There's a lot of dust. There's a lot of, you know, warfare, you know, things like that happening. The sun and moon, like you wouldn't expect him just to say the sun and moon being darkened all the way through right to the end of Revelation. Sometimes the sun is scorching. So it's like the whole ecosystem's just being destroyed. And I guess, you know, the ozone layer will probably really have problems then. But yeah, anyway, after the tribulation.
The sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heaven shall be shaken, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn. That actually sounds just like what we read in Revelation 1:7. And they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, And he shall send his...
So it sounds like it, but it's not it. And that's where you have to rightly divide the word of truth. You have to have everything in its correct place. And so clearly from Matthew chapter 24, verses 14, or all the way through till the scripture that Tommy just mentioned, he's talking about the second part of the 70th week of Daniel. And it is specifically warning those people who are in Judea, flee to the hills and all this sort of stuff. And so if you read in Revelation 12, it says that the woman has been protected, the woman being Israel, has been protected up until this point. But then there's great tribulation against them. So there's great tribulation against the world and against a lot of people. But specifically, the second part of the tribulation is persecution and tribulation against the Jewish people. And so he says, flee to the hills. He talks about the 144,000 that in the first part of the tribulation, in chapter 7, they're all alive and well and kicking. In the second part, they're not. They're around the throne, around the 24 elders singing songs. That means they're up in heaven. And so that would mean that they have been persecuted to death, that they have died for their faith. And so being specifically, from it's sort of like, well, Israel is the church. It's like, okay, well, these people, it clearly says, from this tribe, from that tribe. It's just got this list of the 12 tribes there. And so you have to go, well, that's but see, then Tommy, he's just recently done a teaching or a debate and basically said that Israel is the church. And so like I can understand if people get to this point, then they have to go back and start being a preterist, or they have to go back in time and sort of start talking about 70 AD and all sorts of weird things, because it doesn't fit in their futurist timeline that to have Israel there. It goes against what Anderson is teaching. So we've got Helg in the house. Grace and peace, y'all.
His angel, the great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. What's that one? That's rapture. Okay, he's gathered.
Yes, it is a type of rapture. He gathers them from heaven and from earth, because there are people who are left on the earth after the tribulation. Or after the 7 years, there's still people who have survived through that. And there are people in heaven who have been raptured in the initial first rapture, and they've been persecuted. And so, so there are, and I might just get that little table up, which I have, of the 7 raptures, which seems to be like the most mocked thing that I've said. Since, let me just jump down here. Here we go. Since I started talking about these issues. And so we see in the book of Revelation, there are 7 rapture/resurrections. And the final one, which I believe is the second coming of Christ, when he puts his feet on the Mount of Olives in Revelation 19, that's when he gathers everyone from heaven and also from earth, because we see that in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, where Matthew 24 specifically says he's gathering them from heaven, but in Mark, I think it says he gathers them from one end of the earth, but also from the uttermost part of heaven, and he's gathering everyone to him, to himself. Okay, and so that's what he does. And we see through these resurrection rapture type things, the one that these guys are saying is the one. There's no one alive there. In Revelation chapter 6, they said, "How long, O Lord, until you start punishing these people?" He's like, "Just wait a while, until all the other guys are dead, then we'll do this." So Revelation 7, it's like, who are these, John? Oh, they came out of great tribulation. And so they'd all died. Not they got raptured. You know what I mean? And so, but they're in heaven. So there is a resurrection rapture type thing happening, but not of alive people. They're dead. So the whole tribulation saint thing is to do with dead people, not living. So we see the 144,000, they all died. The harvest, Revelation 14, they all died. The overcomers of the mark of the beast, they all died. But at the second coming, they're alive. They're from heaven, from earth, from everywhere. So, and the ones who are from heaven, I think it's this crowd, including the Old Testament saints, which I believe were resurrected when Christ resurrected. So this is one of the things I'm realizing. Tommy McMurtry, Stephen Anderson, I'm not sure about Kirshner yet, but they believe that none of the Old Testament saints were resurrected. And there's sort of like this mocking in in Matthew chapter 27, where it says, many of the graves were opened and they appeared to many and all this sort of stuff. Oh, well, that's like a few zombies walking around. That's not, the Old Testament saints being resurrected. And it's like, why are they mocking this? I never could sort of figure that out. Now I understand they don't believe that anyone's ever been like resurrected, raptured. It's like up until this point, it's like, oh no, not only are they conflating the second coming of Christ with the rapture and putting those together and getting all the verses and stacking them on each other, they're getting the Old Testament ones and putting them on. It's just like this, 15 piles of gelati they're walking around with, like, yeah, we've got our doctrine correct. And I'm just like, guys, and so when someone comes along, he goes, okay, let's look at the book of Revelation, and all the time someone is resurrected or raptured, they're like, oh, 7 raptures. Oh, that's the funniest thing I've ever heard. What an idiot and all that. And it's like, well, it's from the Bible. Which part of this do you disagree with? It's just Bible. I mean, I don't know how you that's just a summary. It's a bit like saying, okay, if I was going through the book of Matthew, okay, Jesus went to Capernaum and then he went to this place and then he went to that place, and everyone getting upset. And it's like, why? Well, why would it be upsetting to have this? Because they have a timeline sequence that only really a guru can teach. The Alan Kirshners and the Stephen Anderson types, they're teaching this type of thing. And so once you're fully indoctrinated into it, when you just show, okay, this is a basic sequence of the Bible, without a guru, this is just, if you just got the book of Revelation and said, okay, I'm just going to find every verse that talks about someone being taken up into heaven or whatever. And so you start going through it and you create a list like this, they're mocking that. And it's like, why would you do that? And so, because they put most of these all on top of each other, the big, like a big, hamburger, just layer upon layer, and it's getting bigger and bigger. And now they've got the Old Testament and they're putting that on top of it, the resurrection of the Old Testament saints. It's like, and so that's why they mock the whole concept of Abraham's bosom, and the concept of an upper Sheol and a lower Sheol and all that sort of stuff. And I think some of the, King James stuff of, oh, you're mentioning Sheol and Hades, and why are you mentioning these Greek words? I think a lot of that is because what we're doing is we're articulating an argument against their position, which is pretty watertight. And they have to sort of say, oh, well, no, we just go with what the King James says, that Jesus roasted like a chicken in hell, and not discerning even the English word hell. Like the English word hell, if you do a study into it, and I remember doing this study like 20 years ago, the English word hell, now I believe in a literal burning hell that goes forever and ever and ever. Okay. But the English word hell comes from a word that basically means like a cell, like a prison. Okay. So it's a prison, but the Bible adds color to that and says there's flames there. Okay. But if the Bible said there was red roses there, I'd go, okay, there's red roses there, but there's not. So the Bible says there's flames there. There is. And so whenever you see someone in hell, when you see Jesus talking about Abraham's bosom and the rich man being in hell, like that Greek word is Hades, you go, okay, there's flames there. But then when you understand that Hades in the Greek is equivalent to Sheol in the Old Testament, Sheol is the abode of the dead. Hades is the abode of the dead. So the abode of the dead is where the righteous went as well. And so what, the righteous are burning in hell? No, that doesn't make sense. And so then when you study into it and you look at all the verses on it, not just pick one verse in the book of Acts, and see what you have in the book of Acts is overlap. You have people who are looking at a scripture that says, you will not leave my soul in hell. So it's translated from the Hebrew Sheol into Greek Hades and then into English hell. Okay. Now, in 1611, hell meant both the upper and the lower part. Okay. So that was understood because people understood the etymological link to cell. Okay. The whole concept of burning is the biblical concept put into that word. Okay. So for something to be in hell, like you could literally say back in those days that, if like say King James's mother, Mary Queen of Scots, like she was in jail, she was in hell, but it wouldn't fit in with the biblical hell. There's a difference between a biblical hell and just the usage of the word hell. And so even just an etymological look at the word hell. So let's just type in etymology hell. Oops, hello. Okay. Also hell, Old English hell, helly, netherworld, abode of the dead, infernal regions, place of torment for the wicked after death. Okay. From the Proto-Germanic helio, the underworld. See also the Old Frisian heli, Old Saxon helia, Dutch hell, Old Norse hell, German holly, Gothic, etc. Literally a concealed place. So, this is just an online etymological dictionary, the first thing I've found. So I haven't, I'm not going into all the details, but this is just bog standard understanding that someone like Stephen Anderson, Tommy McMurtry, people who should know what the word hell means, they don't know. They just want to go, no, it just means this because it fits in with their eschatology. Compare, cave, cavern, to cover, to conceal, to save, like preserve. Let's hell all of our carrots in a jar. One who covers up or hides something. It's a hidden place, the abode of the dead. It was the name of Loki's daughter who ruled over the dead in Niflheim, the lowest of all worlds, Nifl midst. So this is in the Old Norse. It might have reinforced the English word as a transfer of pagan concept to Christian theology and its vocabulary. So in Middle English, used in the King James Version for the Old Testament Hebrew, Sheol. Okay, so we have Hades, Gehenna. We also have Tartarus. Used figuratively of a state of misery, any bad experience. So people say, oh, yeah, I went through a hell of a time or whatever. Hell break loose, da, da, da. So you can see that etymologically it is related to something hidden. Okay, so I think you'd have to agree with me with that. And so when you're talking about the timeline of my eschatology and what I believe is biblical eschatology, the Old Testament saints, they had a concept of the upper Sheol, the abode of the dead where the righteous were. And then you have the abode of the dead where the unrighteous are. So, there's stories in the Bible where the earth split open and people fell into hell. Okay. So obviously, someone who is a good guy like Daniel, he's not going to burn in hell like a chicken. Like he's not going to roast in. He's going to go to Sheol. Now, Sheol has two compartments, and Jesus conveniently gave us this story of the rich man Lazarus, and we can see those compartments. That's why we say the upper level is Abraham's bosom, the lower level is hell, or lower Sheol, or Hades. Okay. So then we get to the time of the resurrection of Christ. The upper part has been emptied. When Jesus rose from the dead, he descended into the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. And so he said to the thief on the cross, today you would be with me in paradise. He didn't say today you'll be roasting with me like a chicken in hell. No, he went to paradise. Then that after 3 days, the resurrection happened. All of those Old Testament saints were taken up into heaven. So then what is Sheol then? Well, Sheol then, the only part left is the lower part, which is in the Greek then, as the Greek church moves along, they call it Hades. So when Peter's giving his sermon in Acts chapter 2, he's referring back to a time when there was 2 levels. Now the resurrection's happened. There's one level. One level's been taken into heaven. And so there's one level called hell. So you can't put that type of theological understanding into the time of Acts chapter 2. You have to put it in its correct range, which is back in before the resurrection, and back in David's time. He's specifically talking about that. And he's saying, you will not leave my body in hell. So that was just the English word, which means a cell or the abode of the dead. Now, we in modern times, we go hell, burning fire. Okay. But people were, I guess, more educated back in 1611 times. They understood the cell concept of the word hell. And so they were like, okay, well, that is talking about the concept of having a righteous Sheol and an unrighteous Sheol, a righteous Hades and an unrighteous Hades. But now all of those people have been taken up into heaven. And so now we only have the word Hades, meaning the abode of the dead for the damned. So eventually that Hades, this is one of the reasons why the New King James translates it as Hades, because they tried to bring this across, but the word Hades most people have no idea what that means. So when you get Hades, eventually Hades is going to be thrown into the lake of fire, which is Gehenna. So when Christ is talking about Gehenna, he's talking about after the great white throne judgment. That's when Hades is thrown into Gehenna, and all the people who are already in there. So once you go to hell, there's no escaping. The only event that's going to happen that you got to look forward to is stand before God. He's going to say you were wrong, and then you're thrown back. You're thrown back into hell, and hell's thrown into the lake of fire. So Hades gets thrown into Gehenna. So when you understand there is a distinction in the Greek there, that's why some of these modern Bibles translate hell as Hades. But I don't think that transliterating a word really helps anyone. If you were doing a theological study into it, you would look at the Greek anyway. I don't think anyone reading the New King James goes, oh, Hades eventually gets thrown into the lake of fire. It's like, no, hardly anyone recognizes that except for a few geeks here and there. And so, but what Anderson, and see, it's quite amazing. Most people who I come against, like Joyce Meyer, Kenneth Copeland, there's quite a lot of heretics who believe this, who believe that Jesus roasted like a chicken in hell. They use that type of, in Acts chapter 2, it says, you will not allow your Holy One to see corruption. You will not leave him in hell. See, it's talking about the burning hell. It's like, no, you've got to understand that he is quoting what David said, and that was a prophecy of Christ. So that is all to do with before that time. You can't create an anachronistic concept of having that being a burning hell. So that's why, Stephen Anderson and others are like, we just stick with the King James there. It says hell. What is hell? Put your hand up. If you're 4 years old, put your hand up. What's hell? It's a burning place. See, Jesus roasted like a chicken. He wouldn't say roasted like a chicken, but so that's where they get the Jesus burning in hell thing, which is just completely wrong. It's just ridiculous. But but one thing that is interesting, and just to throw this in the mix, because I don't think Stephen Anderson is a dummy. He's a very smart guy. Lancelot Andrewes actually believed that Jesus went to hell, and he was one of the King James translators. Now, others didn't believe this, but what you can see is that this was actually an issue that was brought up in 1611 as well. And so people were debating these things. They were talking about it. And Lancelot Andrewes, who I really respect due to his linguistic ability to speak 21 languages, 15 modern languages and 6 ancient languages, he said that Jesus burned in hell. And so it's quite interesting. I would totally disagree with him. I believe that is a heretical concept, but he believed that. There were many others who didn't, but he specifically believed that. So when I was studying into this, I was like, okay, let's look at what the King James guys believed. And I was going through going, okay, well, this guy believed this and believed that. And then found this sermon and it was like, okay, he believed that. That's really strange and weird. And it's like, but perhaps it is I don't know, Roman Catholic thing, something to do with a purgatory type of thing that has a bit of overhang into Protestantism, perhaps. But I've always rejected the whole concept of Jesus burning in hell. It doesn't fit in with my understanding of the timeline of the Old Testament, of the New Testament, or my eschatology at all. So let's get back to what Tommy's saying. But I've lost my screen here. Where are we? See if there's any comments. Aha, I've dragged my screen away. Okay. So Boulders Alliance says, kept pure in all ages, awesome handle. Kept pure in all ages. What if John the Revelator is simply using prophetic recapitulation times 7 to make a single point? I usually accept the Bible is literal until it says itself that it's not literal, or it says it's like a bear, or it's like this. And then I go, okay, well, it's not literally like that, so, yeah, like to me, when we look at the Old Testament speaking about the first coming, there were many scriptures that were literal and that Christ literally fulfilled. So I wouldn't see that God would change his character and go, okay, well, what I'm going to do in the future is I'm going to throw all that out and I'm just going to talk about figurative things, and I'm just going to talk about like a poetic message or something like that. I think God is very clear that he fulfilled things, and he has dates that were fulfilled. The first part of the 70th week of Daniel, the first 69 weeks were fulfilled in Christ. When Christ stood on the Mount of Olives, he was able to say, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I wanted to gather you together like a hen gathers its chickens, but you were not willing. You missed the day of your visitation. Now, when you do the math there, you understand that the writing of the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, that happened exactly 483 years to the day earlier. And so that was the fulfillment of the 69 weeks. And it says there will be 69 weeks and then the Messiah will be cut off. And so then Christ, he died, and then it says then there's going to be this 70th week, and so the 70th week, I know some people, and even Tommy McMurtry has this sort of strange thing where I've heard Seventh-day Adventists say this, but that after Stephen, that's like the cutoff point of the 70th week. The Seventh-day Adventists believe the 70th week of Daniel was sort of fulfilled at Stephen. So I heard Tommy McMurtry say that when he was getting stoned to death, and he said, "Father, forgive them." Well, Jesus was just about to come again, but then he pulled back because of Stephen. I was like, man, that's weird. But anyway, so we're going to go through all that as we go through these issues. So using prophetic recapitulation to make a single point. So I guess it depends on what recapitulation is and how you would define recapitulation. So I've just looked it up. It says an act or instance of summarizing and restating the main points of something. Yeah, so I guess instance of summarizing and restating. I guess in a way I'm thinking that you're saying that you would hold to a position where you believe that Christ has already come in 70 AD and things like that. But if you are a futurist, I mean, a lot of Calvinists are, the recapitulation or repeating things, I don't see that happens in the book of Revelation at all. I know that these guys are sort of like, okay, every time there's a rapture, we've got to place it on top of each other. Every time there's a cloud, every time there's a trumpet, and they sort of put it all together and say that's the coming. Where I just don't find that type of timeline. And to me, that timeline comes from a guru's thought, not from the plain reading of Scripture. If you're exegeting the book of Revelation, you'll see that the first 3.5 years is between Revelation chapter 4, verse 1, all the way through to Revelation 13. And then from 13 to 19 is another 3.5 years. It talks about that. It says the beast will continue for 42 months. And so without, sandwiching them on, or folding it in half and going, okay, we'll read it that way, it just makes a lot more sense. And so I'll continue with your comments. Joseph's dreams and Daniel's visions recapitulated a single theme. So I guess we'd have to look at all those individually, because no doubt if we're going through the book of Revelation and the seals are stretched out to 3.5 years, say by these guys, and then the vials and the trumpets are put on top of each other by these guys, and the whole book of Revelation is folded over by these guys. So no doubt the reading of Daniel is going to be like that. See, this is one of the things where when I'm teaching about eschatology, the first thing that I teach is the timeline, because if people don't get the timeline, that they don't get anything. Okay, so it's a bit like if we were to play basketball, I would get a spray can and spray. These are the boundaries. If you go over that line, you're out, sort of thing. Because if you don't know the boundaries, you'll be all over the place. And so this is where some people get their boundaries from Matthew 24, and they're not sure if it's the first part or the second part or the tribulation period, the 7 years. And so some people get it from Daniel. Some people get it from, 2 Thessalonians. They've got this order. But to me, the first thing that I say when I'm teaching about eschatology is that John was told, right, the things which you have seen, the things which are, and the things which will be hereafter. So those three things, the things which have been, chapter 1 of the book of Revelation, he saw Christ. Okay. So the things which were in John's day. There were 7 churches. So write the things which are. And so he wrote about the 7 churches for 2 chapters. Then the things which shall be hereafter. So that in the Greek it's metatafta. So that appears twice in Revelation chapter 4, verse 1. It says, metatafta, after this, I saw a door in heaven and a voice like a trumpet saying, come up hither, and I will show thee things that shall be hereafter. And the word hereafter is metatafta as well. So after this and hereafter appear in the English in that verse, but both of them represent metatafta. To me, that shows that is the hereafter that's begun. So basically the book of Revelation, 1, 2, and 3 are to do with us, with our church age. But then when you get to chapter 4, verse 1, it opens up to the hereafter. So then when we look at the hereafter, when you look at the certain dates and times and things like that, and we'll go back to Daniel and we'll look at those things. And so that would be, I guess we're gonna have to do that because we're going through the book of Revelation, chapter 1 here. And so when we go through this, there's going to be, what's the abomination of desolation? Does the rapture happen before, after, during, whatever? So all these things are going to come up. And so, saying Daniel recapitulated a single theme, I guess to me, Daniel is a bit like Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There are parts, like say Luke 17, it's just this part of, it talks about the second coming and everything like that, but it is separate from Luke 21, but it's still the same type of theme, because when we read in Matthew 24, it's got all those similar type of things mentioned. So that will have to be something that we go back and look at. So to me, what I do, I get the book of Revelation. So I made this chart. Now I'm going to show you this. Do a Ken Hogan here and sell this for $50 a pop. No. I'll just go big here. So you might see this chart here. Now it's hard because we're actually going backwards. But what I did is, you can see up the top there, I can hardly see it myself. Each square is a chapter of the book of Revelation. Okay, so, that's Revelation chapter 5 there, for example, 6, 7. So what I did is I just divided up into 22 chapters at the top. Okay, so to me, the first 3 chapters, where my fingers are here, they're not really relative to the metatafta, the hereafter. But then we have these 2 chapters, 4 and 5, where John is in heaven, and so we're looking at people who are they're casting down their crowns, so they've already been crowned. They're people from the they're saying we have been redeemed, we are kings and priests, and all that sort of stuff. And so those 2 chapters are to do with that. Then the real timeline starts in when the 4 horsemen come. So that's when I've got to the halfway period. And so this line here is Revelation 13. Then so Revelation 13 all the way through to Revelation 19. And then we've got 3 more chapters to do after the 70th week of Daniel. Okay. So to me, Revelation describes this timeline, and you hang everything else. You hang Matthew on it, Mark on it, Luke on it, Daniel on it, and any of the Old Testament prophecies that talk about this time, you hang them into this timeline sequence. We don't get the book of Revelation and hang it on those other sequences. This is the final authority, in a sense. This is like the canon, the rule of law that we hang everything else upon. And so once that's understood, then we can put the things in Daniel into its correct timeline. We can put things in the book of Matthew. So most of what's written after the abomination of desolation happens here. The timeline is the last 3.5 years in the book of Matthew. So I've got Matthew 24, here, Mark 13, Luke 21, Luke 17, 1 Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians. Then I'm going through the moon, the sun, the stars, and pointing out all those other things. And there's quite a lot of other things that I could have done as well. This is just just to actually keep my mind focused on the bigger picture of the timeline. But so hopefully you can see that and understand where I'm coming from with that. Because when you look at the other timelines, so these are this is from like Donning's book. So this is actually identical to Stephen Anderson's one, but I guess he doesn't want to be associated with Stephen Anderson, so he's created his own timeline. But it has the whole section here that's the seals, but it goes for 3.5 years. It's stretched out, and then you have the trumpet and the vials all being sort of like the same events and all this sort of stuff. And it's like I can't see that for the life of me. And then we have this one. I think this is Alan Kirshner's one, or it might be someone else's. But so you have the seals, the Antichrist, World War, food famine. So that goes on for 3.5 years. Then there's a resurrection, and then the 3.5 years of the wrath of God. So that's their timeline. So you have to stretch out the sixth seal for 3.5 years. And to me, it's just strange because then they fold it over each other, and it's like, okay. So, but we're going to try and understand that as we go along. So I'll just go back to this screen here. But yeah, I appreciate these questions. I'm not having a go at you or your eschatology, and I actually don't even know your eschatology or your position, but I appreciate that question because it's making me think and it's making me plan for future videos. And so also Joseph's dreams, and so that's an interesting one because in Revelation chapter 12, which I did a video on Revelation 12. I would encourage you to go and have a look at that. But I didn't really go too much into Joseph's dreams or anything like that. I just sort of recognized that the woman is most probably Israel because of the 12 stars and things like that and the dreams that Joseph had. So, and honest question, did Revelation mean the same thing to believers in the 1st century and 5th century as it does to believers today? Very good question. I think because it would have been more personally relative to people going through persecution. Usually they think they're going through the apocalypse. That's just something, I'm sure that people going through the ghettos of World War II, they would have thought this is it. People, Christians going through persecution in any age. I mean, we just look back through the Reformation period where people were suffering persecution. They were like, well, this is it. The Pope's the Antichrist, and that they just usually get things around them. Say even in the King James, it says the man of sin is the Pope, so. And so usually people make eschatology relevant to their time. And because we have the convenience of being further along in time, we are actually closer to Jesus' coming than those other people. So we can, in retrospect, look at what they believe and either accept it or reject it, but we are closer. So I think every generation has been like that. And I think every generation has expected that Christ would come. And I think the words that Christ said are said in a way so that people would always have that sense of imminency, because we could die tomorrow and the dead in Christ rise first and go in the rapture anyway. So when he's talking about, I will come from my own and all this sort of stuff, or I'll come as a thief in the night, be ready. But then that whole generation dies and none of them are raptured alive. Well, they're all raptured but dead. And so they still get raptured. So some people, Paul would have been writing to them in the first book of Thessalonians, and said, okay, the dead in Christ will rise first. We that are alive and remain will be caught up together to meet them in the clouds. Like, some of those people who read that could have died like a month later, and they actually go in that event. So I guess the thing is too, when we're looking at the early church, it can be hard to piece together everything that was going through the mind of the early Christians, because we don't have everything. We have fragmentary information, and but there was quite a lot of. It's interesting if you go through Eusebius, he was pre-tribulational, which is quite interesting, and so this has been something that's coming out. People studying the early church writers, because what's happened is this new post trib pre-wrath position has come out in the 90s, and it's claimed that this is a new position. This is a brand new position. It's going to get popular, so brace yourself. And so people like Tex Mars have embraced it, and then Alan Kirshner and Stephen Anderson's popularized it, and there's lots of other people involved with that. But this position since 1990 has exploded. So it was taught in the 1980s, but officially written about in the 1990s. And then, so this position has exploded. But what's usually stated is, well, there's no one in the early church who believed in a pre-tribulational position. And most pre-trib guys have just gone, yeah. But because most of these pre-trib guys have never really studied it, they've never really looked for it. It's a bit like the Revelation 16:5 thing. It's like, it's a conjectural inundation, and people are like, I guess it is, until you do your own study into it. And when you look and study Eusebius talks about a pre-tribulation rapture 6 times. And so when you go through the early church writings, you can see the pre-tribulation rapture. People talk about Ephraim, the Syrian, Pseudo-Ephraim, I think it was in Syriac. And anyway, I've forgotten the name of it, but that was something that was brought about by, was it Grantley MacDonald? No, it's not Grantley MacDonald. Anyway, I'm getting the name wrong there. Grantley. It's Grantley something. Anyway, he wrote a book about it in the 90s, I think, or an article that became a book. I think I've got his book here, actually. Anyway, so the whole concept of, is there information about a pre-trib rapture in the early church? Yes, there is. It's just not known. And even pre-trib guys don't know it. And unfortunately, there's the Institute for Pre-Tribulation Research Center, or whatever it's called, and oftentimes it's just the teachings of 3 or 4 people that sort of outshine everyone else. There are people doing real work into looking at the early church writings and finding these places and pointing out that people believe that there was going to be a pre-tribulation rapture. And so, so I just sort of point that out. So did Revelation mean the same thing to believers in the 1st century, in the 5th century, and how does it to believers today? So I guess, it's hard to say how the church would have been in the 5th century, because I know how the popular church would have been, the Byzantine church, but things changed very quickly in those days. One minute you've got massive persecution, the next minute you've got state acceptance of the church. Then you've got the whole construct of mixing church and state. So I guess those people would have been looking at their eschatology and squeezing the book of Revelation, just like we do today. We go, okay, well, the book of Revelation, who's the Antichrist? Well, it's probably, I believe the Bible says in Micah chapter 5 who the Antichrist is. He's going to be an Assyrian. I believe that thoroughly. Studied that for many years, where it talks about the Assyrian shall come in there, and Jesus will destroy him when he comes back in the gates of Nimrod, and so it's quite interesting. But I guess too, 100 years ago, you didn't have things like the state of Israel and the concept of rebuilding a temple there and all that. Where now it's talked about by everyone. So yeah, really good question, and I appreciate that. And so anything you want to ask, or and I'm interested in other people's positions too. If you want to throw up what you think or what you believe or whatever, that's fine. I can talk about that. I mean, I'm talking about this IFB stuff and this position here. Now I know some people would be interested in that and they're watching because of that, but at the end of the day I want to go through this position as far as I can, and then go, okay, let's go through mid-trib position. Okay, let's go through these other positions. But at the moment, I have really no desire to go through mid-trib and all these others. This just seems like the position that is coming against pre-trib the most. So it's like, okay, well, I'm going to have to deal with this. And most of that has to do with Stephen Anderson, with him talking about his post-trib moments and bringing out videos after the tribulation and all this sort of stuff, where I think I've got some very good answers for those errors. And I believe that this position is an error. But the thing is, too, these guys will basically sort of make claims that, pre-trib guys are just not saved. We're just, as dumb as a piece of dog poo or whatever. We don't know what we're doing. Where that's where I want to go through their stuff with a fine-tooth comb and point out that it's actually these guys who don't know what they're doing. So,
gathering together his elect. All right, he's gathering the saints. In Jude, that verse, in Armageddon, he's coming with his saints. He's coming to execute judgment during that time. In the rapture, he is coming for his saints. At Armageddon, he's coming with his saints. And we do not see him coming with his saints here in Matthew chapter 24, which people also want to say this is Armageddon.
Okay, so let's look at that claim. Let's go to Luke 21 first. In the King James Version. We want to marry all these verses up. We don't just read Matthew 24 as a standalone verse. We look at other things. So it says, then they shall see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Okay. So it's really, this is the one out of the three, Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21. I hate these. Look, this is on a Bible page. I know it's not really, it's just ridiculous. Bible Gateway just have all these stupid ads. Then they shall see the Son of Man. Oh, it pops back up. Then they shall see this coming of the Son of Man, coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Okay. So we should really be looking at Mark 13 here, KJV. So let's look at this one. It says, and then they shall see the sunning of then they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then he shall send his angels and gather together his elect from the four winds. And as I was saying, this doesn't mean they're taking him from earth to heaven, as Anderson sort of made out. It says from the uttermost part of the earth to the uttermost part of heaven. It doesn't mean they're taking him from earth to heaven. It means they're gathering them from the earth and from heaven, because he's gathering his elect from the four winds, means all directions, north, east, south, west. So from every part, so from every part of earth to every part of heaven. So that means there are people in heaven. So that would come against their whole concept that at the resurrection rapture, which they believe this is, and they believe this is the second coming as well, that there's no one in heaven. How come they're gathering people from heaven? That's why Anderson has to read this really quick. He goes, from the uttermost part of earth to the uttermost part of heaven, and then he just moves on. It's like, okay, let's look at this verse slowly. And he shall gather his elect. So his elect would be Christians from the four winds, from every direction. And then it describes what these four winds are from the uttermost part of the earth. So that would include Africa and China and Australia and America. And that would also include not he's taking us, from to, but it's inclusive of the earth. It includes also the uttermost parts of heaven. Because you got the uttermost part of earth, the uttermost part of heaven. So it's just saying from everywhere. Anywhere there's going to be humans, he's gathering them. So this is a parallel verse for Matthew 24. So let's just zip back to Matthew 24 that he's reading. Matthew 24. I think it's 36, is it? No. Here. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, and he shall send his angels with the sound of a great trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds. And look at this, from one end of heaven to the other. So from heaven. It's interesting. So in the other one, he's gathering them from earth and from heaven. Here he just mentions from one end of heaven to the other. Okay. And so there is a gathering, and this is at the second coming. Christ gathers everyone to himself. Everyone is gathered there. So that's why I've mentioned these 7 raptures. There are, the rapture of dead people, 2 witnesses are alive, 144 dead, the harvest dead, the overcomers dead. But at the second coming, there is a rapture. It's a gathering together. And so the word harpazo applies to people like Philip the evangelist. He was taken up and found in Azotus. So he was raptured up. And Paul said that he was caught up into heaven. It says twice he uses the word harpazo there. And so, so I think that that has to be taken into consideration when we're listening to Tommy talk about Matthew 24. So kept pure in all ages says, thanks, Nick. I'll be signing off soon. Godspeed, Christian McChaffery. Thanks for jumping in. I enjoyed your questions. They were very thought-provoking and put me on the spot, but I'm glad I want to be put on the spot. Thanks.
We see him gathering up his saints during this time, exactly what we see him doing in 1 Thessalonians 4.
Well, we could also say at the end of the millennium, when there is a great white throne judgment, isn't God going to gather together all his saints there for the great white throne judgment? We are going to be the righteous ones, and we are going to actually judge the world. So this is something that a lot of Christians don't understand. We will judge angels. We will judge Satan. We will judge, your unsaved family and friends and people in this world. We are going to judge with Christ. It's a pretty heavy thing to think about. And so hell is everyone's going to be gathered, and it talks about this other gathering. So maybe I'll even go there. We're looking at Revelation, I think it's chapter 20. Don't want the NIV. Okay, yeah, so we've got the 1,000 years. Gog, Magog. Okay, I saw a great white throne. That's why we call it the white throne judgment. And he that sat on it, whose face the earth, I'll just enlarge this so you guys can read it. Most people listen to this anyway, but some read it. I saw the great white throne, him who sat on it, whose face the earth and the heavens fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God. And the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which are written in the books according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them. And they were judged every man according to their works. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. So you've got a rapturing of all the dead people too. So you've got a gathering of all the righteous to be part of this great white throne judgment. We will judge the world, and you just have to look at parallel verses to figure all that out. In 1 Corinthians it says, are you not able to judge the smallest things in the church? Don't you know that we will judge angels? And it talks about all this stuff. And so then there's this gathering of all the people who, the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged out of those things. The sea gave up the dead. What's giving up? The sea gave up. So all that were in the sea, the dead went up, and death and hell were delivered up, and the dead which were in them, and they were judged every man according to their works. And then that death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. So that's when it's like Hades is cast into Gehenna. So that's the difference between Hades and Gehenna there. This is the second death. So it's not a happy experience. And whoever was not found in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. So you want to make sure that your name is in the book of life. So, so going through this, there is a gathering. There are several gatherings. So again, what's happening with these guys, they are saying, okay, there's a gathering here, there's a gathering there, there's a gathering there. Oh, these are all the same. But then when you point to other gatherings, why aren't these, gatherings mentioned? Oh, well, that's after the 1,000 years and all that. But it's like there are different gatherings. And so that's when that's why they have to mock at this type of concept of having 7 different gatherings, because they have this one gathering. And even the Old Testament says they're going to be gathered too. So it's just the one gathering. And so when they read through Matthew 24, it's like, oh, they're all gathered together. See, that's this type of gathering. And it's like, no, you got to put it in its correct context.
Matthew chapter 26, verse 63, it says, but Jesus held his peace, and the high priest answered and said to him, I adjure thee by the living God, that thou tell us whether thou be the Christ, the Son of God. Jesus saith unto him, thou hast said, nevertheless I say unto you, hereafter shall ye see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power, and coming in the clouds of heaven.
So he's going to see Jesus sitting at the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. See, to me, that would be the white throne judgment. So this guy's going to go to hell, be resurrected at the end of that, and then he sees Christ coming with the clouds of heaven, and it's like he's gathered to this white throne judgment. There's going to be clouds. It always talks about the clouds. And then, but he's just like clouds, rapture, and like, I'm not saying that I couldn't be persuaded that perhaps it's a second coming or whatever. But to me, it's just more logical to go, oh, he's seated on the throne. This guy, if he's going to go to hell, it talks about them being judged after the 1,000 years, the great white throne judgment. It would make more sense if he's saying then. So you will see Christ, coming on the clouds of heaven. And I guess that's where the word coming, that's a really important word. And how that is discerned, and how that is deciphered by the audience that Christ is speaking to. So that probably would be made clear in the first coming prophecies when it talks about Christ's first coming. Then we can get a good understanding of exactly what the coming is, because, is the first coming when Jesus just came in the manger? or he's born. Oh, that's the first coming. Or there are certain things that talk about the coming of Christ when he's doing his ministry, or the coming of Christ when he died on the cross. And so, so we've got to put all the comings of Christ in its correct range. And also with these verses here, to me, this verse seems to fit in with this guy's gone to hell. He's going to be resurrected and stand before Christ at the great white throne judgment. And that is a coming. So it's interesting. So that's where I've got to work all that out.
Then the high priest rent his clothes, saying, He has spoken blasphemy. What further need have we witnessed? Behold, now ye have heard his blasphemy. All right, reminds me of a modalist right there. Always accusing you of blasphemy when you didn't even say anything about blasphemy. That's something that they like to do. But what was this here? Is this rapture Armageddon? This is the rapture. He said, you're going to see him coming in the clouds. And listen, these are the people that are getting ready to cruise.
See, notice you're going to see him coming in the clouds. That's the rapture. It's like, so this guy's going to be dead. It says the dead in Christ, in Christ. The Christians are going to rise first. But the people in hell, like this guy's most probably went to hell. He's going to be resurrected at that time and see Christ. And, it's a weird thing. I'm just trying to fit that in with just basic eschatology, and I'm just going, it's just not fitting. But let's continue.
Crucify him. And he's saying this to him as a bad thing. Okay? Now, if Bill Grady would have been there, he'd have told the guy, hey, don't worry, this is a good thing for you. All right? This is a good thing for you, because when he comes, you're going to believe then this is when all Israel's going to get saved. Now, buy my book. And, you can find out how the land belongs to you. That's what Bill Grady would say. But Jesus is saying this is a warning to him. Listen, when Jesus Christ returns in the clouds, when he comes, it's not going to be a good thing for Israel. They are.
Okay, so I'm just going to look up Bill Grady. Okay, so Grady Publications, Perilous Times, his books, Final Authority. Okay, so he's a King James guy. Okay, so he must, I guess, be teaching about Israel or something like that. So anyway, that's who he's talking about. He must have been a popular guy in the old IFB, I guess.
They are in big trouble. When I mean physical Israel, I mean Christ rejecting Israel. It's going to be very bad for them. They are going to mourn. They're going to look on him whom they pierced, and they are going to mourn for him. So that's another verse that's clearly about the rapture. Jesus coming in the clouds. And it is a bad thing for Christ rejecting Jews. So look at verse 7 again of Revelation 1. Behold, he cometh with clouds, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him, and all the kindreds of the earth shall wail because of him. Even so, amen.
So this is where, I've gone through this quite a lot because we're going through Revelation 1. Where I've pointed out that even those who pierced him, that is probably talking about the great white throne judgment. So I'm saying the same thing about Christ talking to I think it was the high priest when he's talking to him. So yeah, that's an interesting thing. And so I just sort of mentioned that.
Now go to Zechariah chapter 12. Let's go to a gotcha passage of those suffering from severe, uncurable ructardation. All right, let's look at what they like to do with Zechariah chapter 12. It says in verse 10, I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplications, and they shall look upon me whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him as one that mourneth for his only son, and shall be in bitterness for him as one that is in bitterness. In that day there shall be a great mourning in Jerusalem, as the mourning of Hadad Rimmon in the valley of Megiddo. And the land shall mourn, every family apart, the family of the house of David apart, and their wives apart, and the family of the house of Nathan apart, and their wives apart. Okay? This is the rapture. Now, they say it's Armageddon. Okay? Now, why do they say it's Armageddon? One, because they desperately need it to be Armageddon to fit their theology. But here's where they will act like they got you. Okay? And this is just their ignorance. This is just their biblical ignorance. It's they're ignorant of Bible history, because notice what it mentions there in verse 11. It mentions as the mourning of Hadad Rimmon in the valley of Megiddo. Does anybody know what the valley of Megiddo is? Armageddon. The Megiddo Valley, Armageddon, same place. So you mean tell me this isn't talking about Armageddon? Because it's mentioned right there. But wait, let's look at what it's talking about. It says, in that day, there shall be a great mourning in Jerusalem, as the mourning of Hadad Rimmon in the valley of Megiddo. It's saying in that day, when every eye shall see him, there is going to be a mourning that was like a mourning, something that happened before. What?
And so this point here, when I first originally went through this, I agreed with Tommy when we did our debate. I said, look, I agree with you that that because I've never had the belief that Armageddon is the second coming. For some reason, I guess it must have been taught to me when I was a young Christian. For some reason, or I guess perhaps it's just going through a chronological sequence of the book of Revelation. I've gone, okay, here we have, the woman that rides the beast. Here we have Babylon destroyed, and we got Armageddon, and and then it's okay, and then the second coming. I've never gone, oh, the second coming is Armageddon. I've always seen them as separate events. And so he just points out here that they're separate events. And so I'm like, well, I've never really believed that, but apparently Ruckmanites do believe this, and so and many other people do as well. And I have heard people over the years say, "Oh, well, the second coming is the Battle of Armageddon." And I'm like, I guess it's like saying, "Oh, the second coming is the woman that rides the beast" chapter. I'm like, no, I just don't see that, And so, so he's mentioning this. He's sort of debunking it. It's something I didn't have any belief on, but I think he's correct here. And I mentioned that in the debate. I said, I think you've done a good job at looking at that, wherever he got that from, whether he studied this himself and came to that conclusion, or whether he got it from someone like Anderson or whatever. So A. Henner is in the house and says, anything is bad for a Christ rejecter. Insert race. Yeah, it's, but you have to have the Jews, it's the way it's said too. It's not just the Jews, it's the Jews, it's really, they're like Darth Vader's, or did he say Rucktard? Yes, he did. And he says quite a lot of pretty full-on things against people who believe in a pre-trib position, but he specifically attacks the Ruckmanites and calls them Rucktards. So yeah, that's all cool. Let's continue.
What is this event that it's talking about? It's their historical ignorance of the Bible, and I'm not talking about historical as in history outside the Bible. I'm talking about in Bible history, all right, that is in the Bible, okay? And, the old IFB, in their ignorance of the scriptures, they have allowed the Ruckmanites to take them down another one of their rabbit trails. And listen, there are many Old Testament passages that they could easily pull out and use as like a gotcha verse. And if you're not real familiar with that specific passage, they might be able to defeat you in the argument. But if you actually take the time to look at context and to study these events it's talking about, it gets debunked every time. And this is a big gotcha passage. So let's look at this, because it's not saying this event that's happening in Megiddo, in the Valley of Megiddo, is something that's to come. It's saying it's going to be, they're going to mourn like a mourning that took place there. What event was that? Go to 2 Chronicles chapter 35, verse 22. This is something that already happened. All right, the mourning that happened. It says, nevertheless, Josiah would not turn his face from him, but disguise himself that he might fight with him. and hearken not unto the words of Necho from the mouth.
I heard the reference. It went in one ear and straight out the other.
That took place there. What event was that? Go to 2 Chronicles chapter 35, verse 22. This.
Sorry. Was it 35:22? Okay, so I might show the whole chapter.
This is something that already happened. All right, the morning that happened. It says, nevertheless, Josiah would not turn his face from him, but disguised himself that he might fight with him, and hearkened not unto the words of Necho from the mouth of God, and came to fight in the valley of Megiddo. And the archers shot at King Josiah, and the king said to his servants, have me away, for I am sore wounded. His servants therefore took him out of that chariot and put him in the second chariot that he had, and they brought him to Jerusalem, and he died and was buried in one of the sepulchres of his fathers. And all Judah and Jerusalem mourned for Josiah, and Jeremiah lamented for Josiah, and all the singing men and the singing women spake of Josiah in their lamentations to this day, and made them an ordinance in Israel. And behold, they are written in the lamentations and the rest of the acts of Josiah and his goodness, according to all that was written in the law of the Lord. Y'all see it? Josiah was a good king. He was somebody who did a lot of good things, and he fought a battle there, and he died, and a great mourning took place. You have Jeremiah making lamentations for him. Jeremiah, the weeping prophet. This was a very sad day for Israel. And so right here in Zechariah, it's saying in that day, when they look on him who they pierced, they're going to have a mourning like they did in the days of Josiah. He was referring to a specific event. And so just because the Valley of Armageddon is mentioned right there, it doesn't mean that's talking about the Battle of Armageddon, because I got news for you, and this is something to come later on. This battle that happens at the Armageddon, it doesn't happen at Armageddon, all right? Where the blood flows to the horses' bridles does not happen in the Megiddo Valley. It happens in the Valley of Jehoshaphat. That is a completely different place. The armies are just gathered there in one story, and that will come in a later week. But once again, just Bible ignorance. Bible ignorance. And people will see that. They'll see that in Zechariah. Oh, it mentioned Megiddo there. It must be talking about Armageddon. The Rucktards are right. No, that's.
And so that's where I said that in the debate. I agree with you with that point. I studied through it and went, yeah, he's got a point. And but that must be something that the Ruckmanites believe. And so if anyone has anything to show me against that position, I'll gladly read it, look at it.
It's saying the mourning is going to be like the mourning that took place in this event that you forgot about from 2 Chronicles chapter 35. That's why you got to study. All right. That's why you got to study to show yourself approved unto God. That's why you got to rightly divide the scriptures in the biblical sense of rightly divide, and not the Ruckmanite, Darby, Schofield, method of, wrongly dividing the scriptures like they do. So look at John chapter 9, verse 19 and verse 34. So some people, and I've had this question come up to me before. So it clearly in Zechariah 12, or Zechariah mentions they'll look on him whom they pierced, talking about the rapture. Revelation 1, clearly talking about the rapture. In John 19:34, people get confused about this passage.
Okay, so I've just realized I've missed Helg's comments. He said, greetings back. Kept pure in all ages. Nice to see you again. And he has Makarios ho and Ginoskon keho akontes tus logos te prophetes. Blessed is he who reads. So that's in Revelation 1:3a. So thanks for that, Helg.
Passage, it says, but one of the soldiers with a spear pierced his side, and forthwith came there out blood and water. And he that saw it bare record, and his record is true, and he knoweth that he saith true, that ye might believe. For these things were done that the scripture should be fulfilled, a bone of him shall not be broken. And another scripture saith, they shall look on him whom they pierced. All right. So wait, hasn't that already happened? Because right here it says it was fulfilled, right? No, the scripture was fulfilled that a bone of him would not be broken. But then it says another scripture saith, they will look on him whom they pierced. Well, why is it mentioning that? Because there was a prophecy in Zechariah that they will look on him whom they pierced. Who was that? When Zechariah gave that prophecy, they hadn't pierced him yet. So whenever John is writing here, he's showing, hey, this is a part of that prophecy. That one that you pierced, that you're going to mourn for one of these days, was Jesus Christ. He didn't say that scripture was fulfilled, but y'all understand part of that scripture part of it actually took place. The part where they actually pierced someone.
So I would agree with all that.
So that John 19 is not showing that verse as being fulfilled. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense that in Revelation, it has it coming in the future. This is just showing and letting them know, hey, the one who was pierced in Zechariah was Jesus Christ. This is the event right there. So Zechariah's prophecy was not fulfilled, but this prophecy was mentioned because when Zechariah made that prophecy, Christ had not been pierced yet. So look at verse 8. It says, I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the ending, saith the Lord, which is and which was and which is to come, the Almighty. From Genesis to Revelation, the Bible has always been about Jesus. It's always been about him from the beginning. He's the beginning of the story. He is the end of the story. This is his story. This is about how he brought salvation to man. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, he did it all. It was Jesus that was with the church in the wilderness. It was Jesus Christ that died on the cross. It's Jesus Christ that's coming back. It's him that's going to rule and reign in the millennial reign of Christ. So verse 9 says, I, John, who also am your brother and companion in tribulation and in the kingdom and patience of Jesus Christ, was in the isle that is called Patmos for the word of God and for the testimony of Jesus Christ. So the title John, who is your brother in tribulation.
So now we're going to go through. Tribulation is something that all Christians go through. The Great Tribulation, it's like this tired old anecdote. And usually, we hear stories about Corrie ten Boom and just people who pre-trib people who said that you won't go through any tribulation. It's like, it's just tiring to hear this. But let's go through
it. Makes it really hard for you to say that tribulation is the wrath of God. Because listen,
I'm not saying tribulation is the wrath of God, but I guess some people ignorantly have said that somewhere,
We're not appointed unto wrath. But John said, I am your brother and companion in tribulation. Now tell me, how does that work? If we are not under the wrath of God and tribulation is wrath, and John, writing to the churches, says, I'm your brother and companion in tribulation. Now I know he's not talking about the tribulation right here.
Yeah.
But understand, we own.
I'm just waving the hands, and it's like, okay, so you're saying that this tribulation has nothing to do with the Great Tribulation, but it's what Anderson does too.
Own tribulation, except for the Great Tribulation, according to the pre-tribbers. Now listen, we own it. We own tribulation. And John here, he's saying, so think about this. This is a book about end times, and we're supposed to all just think that tribulation equals the wrath of God. Well, John should have used a different word when he referred to himself as your brother and companion in tribulation. That's just a very foolish argument.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I know it's very tiring going through this over and over, but we have to. And let's go through Matthew 24. Okay, so it says, for then, shall be tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. So when we're talking about the Great Tribulation, I know these guys only have one period of Great Tribulation, where I believe the whole 7 years is on and off periods of tribulation. It is the greatest period of tribulation. Just like I wouldn't say that the whole of World War II, people dying was just, in the Auschwitz concentration camp. I would say, well, no, you had other concentration camps, you had other things spread out, and the whole period was a period where people died of, in concentration camps. I wouldn't just say, oh, it's just this one event and just point to that one thing. It's like, and that's what these guys do. They sort of, again, conflate everything all together. And so, but it says, for then shall be great tribulation. So we're talking about general everyday tribulations that every Christian will go through. If you want to live godly in Christ Jesus, you will suffer persecution. And so everyone goes through tribulation, okay? But it says here specifically that this is called great tribulation, okay? So other places it talks about little. Great just means large, a large amount of tribulation. But it's saying here, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. So in other words, there's going to be nothing like this again. This is the biggest tribulation that's going to happen. Okay. But then instead of going, okay, that's defined as a period that that never ever shall be again. Okay. This period of great tribulation. And I believe when it says for then, it's actually just talking about not just this specific tribulation here. It's talking about the whole 70th week. And it's saying for that in those days, there will be great tribulation, which was not since the beginning of the world, no, nor ever shall be. So if I was to say that, I'm just trying to think of a parallel. So it'll come out because he's going to talk about tribulation, personal tribulation versus for the next 5 minutes. So I think we'll just start going through that.
Tribulation and the wrath of God are not the same.
And I agree with that. Most people do.
And Christians are not appointed unto wrath, but we are appointed to tribulation.
Yes. But as Stephen Anderson goes, we're appointed to tribulation. And then he just mentions the Great Tribulation. It's like, we're appointed to tribulation, but that doesn't equate that we will go through the tribulation, the Great Tribulation.
John 16:33, these things have I spoken unto you, that in me you might have peace. In the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. And
in the world you have tribulation, but I've overcome the world.
Revelation 2 verse 10, talking to the churches, says, fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that ye may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days. But be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life.
So is anyone, have you ever heard anyone, I haven't, teach that we will not go through any tribulations? I don't know anyone who's ever once said that. And so I'm just going to find a picture that I put on my Facebook a while back. Okay, so it might just take a little second. But oh yeah, here's a funny one. I think you guys will like this. Worried about your pets after the rapture? After the rapture, pet care. Be prepared for the care of your pet. For just $9.95 per month, you can register your pet to be professionally cared for after you're raptured. All of our staff have been hand-selected based upon their love of animals first, but most importantly to ensure that they are either atheists or non-Christians. So I thought that was pretty funny. Okay, so let's... Well, it might have been a while ago. So this whole concept of conflating the Great Tribulation with just daily tribulation, this is where, Corrie ten Boom, and I went through this with the Stephen Anderson material as well, but it seems like a common thing that's brought up among the post-trib pre-wrath guys. Okay, so where are we? It's quite a long way away. So sorry about this, but I'm so committed now to do it. Okay, bring it. That's there we go. Okay. So we know this meme. So I made this meme up. Okay. Then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And so she's like, so you're obviously speaking about normal everyday trials and tribulations. And he's just like, this is what I see is people just go, it's just strange. Anyway, I'll go through this Corrie ten Boom stuff as well, because I did mention this with the Anderson videos. Okay, where are we? No, I can't seem to find it. But yeah, where Corrie ten Boom basically says that she knows people in China were told by the missionaries that they wouldn't go through tribulation. Okay. So then when the persecution started happening, these people were like, oh, we thought we were going to miss the tribulation. And so many of them, struggled and went through a huge amount of turmoil because they're like, oh, we were told we wouldn't go through the time of tribulation. So this is what Corrie ten Boom said, which is one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. Like, seriously, it's like, who was teaching this? Who was saying that we're not going to go through persecution? I mean, if you're a Christian, you go through persecution. If you go out street preaching today, anywhere, someone will come up to you and say they want to bash you or they want to kill you. And I've been threatened to be stabbed. I've been punched in the face, and you're going to be persecuted. Okay. So imagine I got punched in the face and I'm like, oh, I thought the rapture was going to happen before that. It's just so dumb. And these guys just default to quoting daily tribulation verses and equating it to this time which never has been and never will be again. It's like, well, why are they conflating these two things?
So if this book is written to the churches and churches aren't supposed to go through any tribulation, why would he?
So you notice churches aren't supposed to go through any tribulation. So notice they're purposely conflating these categories. We teach that there's going to be a time of the 70th week of Daniel. We're going to be raptured out of that. And during that time, there is going to be a massive amount of persecution that happens. Are we saying that we will not go through any persecution? Who's saying that? This is just the dishonesty of these people. And so I'm not sure if Alan Kirshner says this, but then again, I have listened to some of his videos where he starts quoting these tribulation verses, and it's just like, what? Why are you doing this? So A. Hannah says, tribulation worketh patience, experience hope, etc. Rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing instant in prayer. Yeah. And so I guess it's like, I'm just trying to think of a parallel where I can connect all the dots, but it's like, I just sort of picture like a big, like, I guess the biggest football game ever. Okay. So just say I said, okay, well, during the 70th week of Daniel, they're going to have the biggest football game ever. It's going to be the biggest one. And then these guys going, no. Or imagine if I said, but we're not going to be there. We're going to be raptured out. We're not going to see this football game. And then these guys are like, no, well, they've played football since day dot. Let's go through it. And let's, people have played football. Look, they're playing football now. How do you explain that? And it's like, I'm not talking about just the football that's happening now or in the past, or I'm talking about specifically in this period of Daniel, we're going to be raptured out. And that period has tribulation in it. So we who are raptured out don't go through that period of tribulation. So he's just mixing everything up. He's mixing up this huge, great event that Jesus said it's never has been like that, and it never will be like that. So if you're saying it never has been like that, that means everything before that it's not relative to it. It's going to be a big event of tribulation. So why go through daily tribulation verses? It's just this is ridiculous. It's very ridiculous. And then where are we? 37:10. Listen to this. Listen specifically to what he says. He conflates the great tribulation with just everyday tribulation.
That ye may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days, but be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. So if this book is written to the churches, and churches aren't supposed to go through any tribulation.
Churches aren't supposed to go through any tribulation. Who is teaching that? It's a straw man. It's ridiculous. We are specifically talking about a period of tribulation that happens in the future, and we believe that we're not going to go through that period of time. And so it just so happens there's persecution in that time. So it gets labeled a pre-trib rapture. But it's not to avoid, like these guys, like, you guys are just chicken, like, I mean, how much persecution is Tommy getting? Some people made an internet thing about him being, being sexually attracted to pumpkins on the internet. It's like, who hasn't had people, call them names on the internet? But it's like, are these guys really suffering persecution? I mean, it just makes me laugh, that just Anderson's sort of like, I'm suffering persecution, what for being, he got bashed by the border guys and tased for being a patriot, not for being a Christian at all. He was standing up for like against borders and all this stuff. It wasn't like he was just preaching the gospel and someone came up and persecuted him. And so, but what we find is these guys have an anachronistic persecution complex where they think because they're going to go through this time that they're like the heroes of Christianity, where they're the Hulk Hogan's of Christianity sort of thing. They're gonna bash everyone because spiritually, because they're going through the tribulation, where these wimpy pre-trib guys, they want to avoid the tribulation and this sort of rubbish. And it's like, no, we just believe, okay, the rapture happens there, and then it's like, okay, so what happens after that? Oh, the mark and things. Oh, we could call it the pre-mark rapture, okay, or the pre-7th week of Daniel rapture, or the pre-seals, trumpets, and vials rapture, but it just so happens to be called the pre-tribulation rapture, okay. But so we're going to avoid that time, but then he's like going back. So it says it'll be a time that never has been before. Okay. It's never, the persecution is never going to be as big as this. But then let's just talk about, these daily tribulation verses. It just doesn't make any sense.
Why would he be telling somebody in chapter 2, you're going to have tribulation 10 days? How come these people are, well, wait, we're not under wrath. Okay? Because tribulation and wrath are not the same things. That is just another massive pre-trib blunder.
So he's found someone who teaches that, and apparently everyone believes it now.
A massive blunder that they literally cannot recover from, and they never will. It is a fatal error, one that they have really let mess them up. So as believers, We do. We own the tribulation. That's ours. And notice too what it says. Says, I, John, who also am your brother and companion in tribulation and the kingdom and patience of Jesus Christ. Okay? I'm not going to spend any time on this right now, but that is a key word right there too that we'll refer to later, because the Bible talks a lot about the patience of the saints. Okay? And whenever we read about patience, it's in Paul's epistles, it's like this. Patience, when the Bible talks about patience, it's often referring to us enduring tribulation and us enduring it patiently. That is what we're supposed to do. Tribulation and patience, they kind of go hand in hand. And that is a key thing we've got to understand. Everything that John is saying in here, it gives a very strong impression we're going to be dealing with some tribulation. But somehow today people are reading the book of Revelation and thinking we're not going to have any tribulation.
Conflating the two again. Instead of the tribulation of that time, the specific one that never will be again, never has been before, conflating it with just everything that has been before, saying it's the same thing.
How do they get that? Because they're not going verse by verse through the Bible. They're reading college textbooks. They're reading other books written by a man, and that's where this foolishness is coming from. So verse 10 says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a great voice as of a trumpet, just meaning it's very loud. Okay, this is not a trumpet blast. Remember that when we get to chapter 4. This is a voice as of a trumpet. It's very loud. Trumpets are loud. Saying, I am Alpha and Omega, the first and the last. And what the is, write in a book. All right, there it is again. What you see, write in a book. All right. He didn't say write a chronological, list of events as they're going to take place. No.
And so notice it doesn't say, write a chronological list, and because they want to claim that there's chronological sequence in the book of Revelation, but then because they don't follow that chronological sequence and they swap everything around, then they sort of have to have both. So they'll say there's a chronological sequence, but John didn't see it in a chronological sequence. And so he just saw what was in front of him and just wrote it down. So I understand that concept that John, he saw a vision. If he saw a dragon with 10 heads and 7 heads and 10 horns, then that's probably what he saw, rather than he saw the kingdoms of Europe or whatever, this sort of thing with, and he just went, that's this type of beast. But perhaps he saw both. Perhaps he saw dragon rising up out of the sea, because this is a vision that God's giving him. And then perhaps behind that, it's sort of like looking through a window or something like that. Then he sees these cities, and because later on he's like, these are the cities, and he seems to understand, what a lot of these things are.
I'm going to show you some things, and as I show you things, write them in a book. Okay, and that is what he's doing.
And so this is where, like I was saying, the whole concept of the book of Revelation is formula. It's a timeline that all the other prophetic concepts of the Bible, you can sort of like getting a yellow post-it sticker and going, okay, we can pin it there, we can pin it here, we can do book of Daniel, abomination, desolation, where do we put it? Okay, we put it right there. And so where what these guys are doing is getting the book of Revelation, cutting it up into little bits and placing it in Matthew 24 and placing it in Daniel, and doing like they don't have something that's a guideline. Where, to me, the book of Revelation is the book of prophecy to do with that particular period of time in the future. And so to me, it's clearly chronological. So everything else hinges upon that. Everything else rests on that. You don't just go back to, Luke 17 and go, okay, we're going to just get the bits of the book of Revelation and squeeze it into there. It's like, no, just go through the book of Revelation. It's a timeline sequence.
And so there are going to be things that overlap, that are repeated, and everybody wants to make it, all just, so simple or whatever.
Why wouldn't God make it simple? To me, it's so simple that people who confuse it, like these IFB guys. They confuse it to the point where you're like, okay, so what's happening next? And you read the Bible and you go, well, it says that's happening next, but I better check with my guru. Then you check with the Stephen Anderson, the Alan Kirshner's, and others, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess I've got to squeeze this, or I've got to stretch out the seals to be 3.5 years, and all this sort of stuff. And that's where you run into trouble.
Yeah, but it's just, you've got to get the right perspective when you're looking at these things.
Got to get friendly with Anderson, and then you'll see it correctly.
And we want to look at it the perspective of John as the things that he is seeing. And so many events are going to be repeated. So says in Senate.
So notice many events are going to be repeated. And that's because they do the folding thing. To me, hardly any of these events are repeated. They should all be taken on face value. And that's why when I put up a chart of 7 raptures that happened during that period, it's just mocked. Because it's like, well, which guru did you get that from? It's like from chronologically reading through the Bible and going, okay, a rapture happens here, a rapture happens there. That's how you read it. You read the book of Matthew, you go through, okay, the infancy, nativity, then you go through the wise men, then you go through John the Baptist came, and then Jesus came, got water baptized, and then the Sermon of the Mount, and you go through this chronological sequence. You wouldn't just get the Sermon of the Mount and put it just after Jesus is born, and then get the baptism of Jesus and put it right up and just before he was crucified, and it's just confusion. And to me, that's how these guys are reading the Bible, and I'm like, how are you getting that? And they're like, well, a cloud is mentioned here and a cloud there, and so we've just put them over each other. And like I was saying with the puzzle, you have to have your rules and your parameters, and so putting a puzzle together, you get this perfect picture. But these guys are getting, like I said, all the pictures of all the pieces of the puzzle with a picture of a tree on it, and they're stacking them up on top of each other and saying, look, it's making a perfect picture. I'm like, no, it's not. It's causing utter confusion.
To the 7 churches.
So Ahannes says, we use great plainness of speech. Yeah, so why would God be confusing? A book of Revelation, dividing it up into 3 parts, as it said, the things you have seen, the things which shall be, the things which are the 7 churches, and the things which shall be hereafter, from Revelation 4 onwards, is all future. And so, yes, there are a tiny little spattering of, okay, well, talking about the woman, and okay, well, that's Israel. Oh, they say, oh, that means you've hit the reset button. And so all of a sudden you see something from the past, you're like, reset. But it's like, okay, it talks about the kings. It talks about, the 8th being the same as the 5th and all this. And so we can understand that the 5th kingdom was the Greek kingdom. And this is relative to the Roman kingdom will continue for the first 3.5 years, and then the Greek kingdom, the Seleucid kingdom, the kingdom of the Antichrist, the little horn, will continue from Revelation chapter 13 onwards. But it's actually talking about past events at that time. So it's talking about these other kings that have been. And so reset, you have to fold that over again, And so you've just got this, I guess, what do they call it, macrame? It's like this folded napkin that's all over the place in it. But they're like, look, what a beautiful picture. And I'm like, no, you got to fold it out, flatten it, and then you can read the story properly. Ahannes says, from the simplicity that's in Christ, the Bible is very simple. And that's the thing. Like, you imagine teaching this stuff to kids. They're like, okay, so what happens next in the story? Well, what we do, kids, in the story, we don't go from, in a chronological sequence. What we do is we fold everything over. It's like, oh, okay, so we're back to the beginning in Revelation 13. Okay, and then not only that, but you're getting the vials and the seals, and you're putting them all on top of each other, and you're sort of like, well, not the seals, the vials and the trumpets, and so it's like all over the place. Folding here and tweaking here, and then stretching out the seals for 3.5 years as well. So it's stretched here. It's like, It's all over the place. It looks like a Picasso.
Which are in Asia, unto Ephesus, unto Smyrna, and unto Pergamos, and unto Thyatira, and unto Sardis, and unto Philadelphia, and unto Laodicea. So why did he write it to 7 churches like that? Well, one, I believe he wrote it to these 7 churches because of the fact that, he wanted them to have it. I think, he's got specific things in there for each of those churches. But, all right, this is also another sign, too, of replacement theology. Okay, because what is it you hear all the time? The Bible's a Jewish book written by Jewish men. We have these. Brian.
The Bible's a Jewish book written by Jewish men. It's like it's exactly what it is. You have to sort of many times you have to jump out of the Jewishness of the Bible, like on rare occasions, because it's so Jewish. It's. I believe every author was a Jew. Some people say Luke wasn't a Jew. I think he was. And it's got so many, like you go through Matthew, the amount of Hebrew idioms there in the Greek, it's astounding. And so, but these guys, because they're like anti-Jew, they're just like, anything to do with Jews, they sort of have to downplay it. And I understand it's written to the 7 churches. But who's John? He's Jewish. And even in my book on Revelation 16:5, I sort of conclude that it's probably most likely said to John in Hebrew. They probably speak Hebrew in heaven. And this is all part of Edenics and the understanding that in the Garden of Eden they spoke Hebrew. And so that's my own conclusion. But a lot of people agree with that, and in the Reformation period, it was just seen. It was mentioned just in passing. Like Beza would just say, "Well, here John, when he hears Jehovah, he hears the one which was and is to come." He didn't say Kyrios. God wasn't speaking to him in Greek; he was speaking to him in Hebrew, and this was just sort of known by people like Beza and others. And so, you've got to understand the usage of words. If you become so anti-Jew that you sort of become anti-understanding Hebrew and understanding Hebrew idioms and Hebrew words and Hebrew culture, and you're going to miss so much. What culture are you going to put into that,
And sharpen these people. They go around thanking Jews for giving us the word of God and for preserving the scriptures for us. The Jews did all this for us. Well, not the book of Revelation.
So I don't know who's thanking Jews here and there, but there might, I dare say there would be some people doing that. But so A. Hannes says, is this guy anti-Jew? Yeah, this guy is like Stephen Anderson's best buddy, but apparently they had a falling out or something recently. But, Anderson's written, well, not written, he's made the movie Marching to Zion. And so in a sense where they don't believe Jews actually exist anymore. But they contradict themselves where they talk about Jews being real, but then they talk about how basically Israel is the church. And then they say there's no more Jews. Jews just don't exist anymore. And the synagogue of Satan, it's quite confused. It's very confusing. But he just recently did on Standing for Truth debate about who Israel is, and so. Basically, he has the same stance as Stephen Anderson on this issue, as Donnie does, I guess Praise I Am does, and all these other guys.
It wasn't committed to the Jews. They were not committed. This oracle of God, it was committed to the 7 churches. And thank God it has stood this test of time. And I think that was one of the reasons he did it. Sent it to 7 different places to help preserve it. And God has miraculously preserved his word. And thank God we have a copy of the book of Revelation. And
that's fine. God wrote it and to the Greeks, the Greek churches, and that applies to us as basically to the Gentiles. So A. Henner says, so it's a form of replacement theology. Yes. And so they seem to have adopted a replacement theology, and also this concept of the post-trib pre-wrath. So someone like Alan Kirshner, he doesn't believe in replacement theology. He believes God still has a plan for Israel, but he believes in the same eschatological sequence as these guys. So it might be a little bit different here and there, but they would be classified as a similar type of belief.
So that I believe that's one of the reasons he sent it to the 7 churches like that. So, and so part of that too, having the 7 copies, it's also a good sign that it's of the validity of it. If just one person brings forth a letter and say, I've got this letter from John, well, are we sure it's from him? Well, then if 6 other people come forward and they have something saying the exact same thing, then there's a good sign that it's for real. So,
and that's a good point, where having 7 letters, they would have been looking at it saying, okay, well, these letters were all written by John. So having those 7 letters all in a similar geographical area, the book of Revelation would have been preserved very faithfully in those places.
Verse 12, look, verse 12 says, and I turned to see the voice that spake with me, and being turned, I saw 7 golden candlesticks, and in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot, and girt about the paps with a golden girdle. And his head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burn in a furnace, and his voice is the sound of many waters. And he had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword, and his countenance was as the sun shineth in his strength. So right here, we're looking at the first thing John sees. Okay? He's just been told, write down the things you see, and here's the first thing he's looking at. Here's the first thing that he is seeing. And what is he looking at? He is seeing Jesus in his heavenly form. That's what's going on right here. He's seeing Jesus in his heavenly form.
So A. Hannah says, great point here about to the 7 churches, which shows the copying process in action, shows manuscript copying preservation. Yes. And so this seems to be one of the most attacked books, like listening to the Thomas Ross, James White debate. He was saying, in the TR, that's the most messed up book, the book of Revelation. It's the messiest. So what I tend to find is, I believe James White is influenced by demons. I think that because of what he does, he speaks things that are not correct and not true, and specific things for a reason. And so text critics seem to attack the book of Revelation and, say Jan Kranz, Erasmus didn't really care about the book of Revelation. It's like an afterthought, and, James White parrots this. And so I think that is sometimes what I do is I see something and just go to the opposite extreme of it. And sometimes that's the truth. You can't always have reactionary theology, and you can't have an experience-based theology, whether it's a good experience or a bad experience. But sometimes it is true. And so sometimes looking at an antonym can really help you. If you go through Proverbs, if you see something that says, if you you spare the rod, you will spoil the child. Or if you reverse that and say, okay, don't. It's like if you spare the rod, you'll spoil the child. But if you don't spare the rod, you won't spoil the child. You're sort of just saying the exact opposite. But sometimes it's good to do that with Scripture, because you get the full understanding of the positive and the negative being said there. And so this whole concept of the seven churches all receiving the book of Revelation shows that in the early church, this was a very strongly attested book, and people would have been saying, wow, yeah, 7 letters and them being copied and sent out. It's quite a huge thing, because I don't know how many copies of Matthew or Mark or whatever were done, but this specifically was 7 complete books of Revelation from the beginning. And so Ahana says, influenced by demons, interesting, explains a lot. Yeah. And so, but what I find is things that have been previously very strong are usually things that Satan will attack vehemently today. Okay, so say if you look back at, say, the country of Germany, what was Germany known for? For Luther and the Reformation. That was a huge blow against Satan. He had most of Europe tied up with the Roman Catholic Church. Then all of a sudden there's religious freedom in a lot of places due to what happened in Germany. But what's Germany known for today? Hitler. It's almost like he even waits for a long period of time. It's like the United States is sort of known for freedom of speech, and for having these good aspects, which the gospel thrives in that type of environment. But look at it today; it's become a circus, and it's become Joe Biden and the Congress, and it's full of, like, it's probably one of the most corrupt nations it's ever been. It's so corrupt. And so, especially when you look outside of America and the influence America has on the world, it's just ridiculous, But it's almost like anything of good and of value, it's like Satan just waits and waits and then goes, look, and it's turned over and there's a whole bunch of maggots there, and it's just disgusting, and it's the most disgusting thing you've ever seen. And so that almost causes you to repel from those things. And so anything decent, anything good, he in time he will attack, and he will attack it. If he's attacking something tenfold, you can almost go, well, that it must have been good at some stage. It's almost like a mindset that you have from looking at these things. And so I would say the book of Revelation and the way that it's attacked by text critics is probably because it was the most attested to book. It's told, blessed are you if you read this. It's the only book that says that. How many people are going to read that then? It must have been read by every Christian. Imagine, there's a book in the Bible that if you read, you're going to get blessed by. Which one are you going to read first? I'm going to read that one, and so I want to be blessed. So people would have read it. People would have gone through it. And so in the early church, they would have been saturated with the book of Revelation and understanding those type of concepts. And so now it's like, oh, that's the worst ever book. That's James White, like, that's a book that in the TR, it's got so many errors, so many mistakes. And so they're trying to throw mud over the book of Revelation because it was so good. So Boulder's Alliance says, I would agree with that. He has always creeped me out. Yeah. German rationalism. Yeah, absolutely. German rationalism. And I guess, too, this happens with church movements. You have a church that's birthed in revival, people loving God, people preaching in solid doctrine and all that. And then, 100 years later, it's a mosque and this type of thing. And I think that whole thing of, all the churches becoming mosques, that's that type of pattern that I'm talking about. So let's just continue for a little bit longer. So we're going for 2 hours and 40 minutes. And so I'll just go a little bit longer and then I'll wrap it up.
He sees 7 candlesticks. He sees 7 stars.
And so a lot of this stuff I just agree with. It's pretty straightforward, just stuff.
He sees a sharp 2-edged sword coming out of the mouth of Christ. What do you think that represents? The word of God is quick and powerful and sharper than any 2-edged sword. And I think John is actually seeing a sword come out of his mouth. Okay, he's writing what he's seeing. This is what he's seeing. All right. Do we see an actual sword come out of Jesus' mouth? I wouldn't be surprised. Or is that just symbolic? I don't know. This is what John is seeing. John is seeing a sharp sword come out of his mouth. And so verse 20, we've jumped down to verse 20 real quick, because this explains what the 7 stars and the 7 candlesticks are. It says, the mystery of the 7 stars which thou sawest in my right hand and the 7 golden candlesticks. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 candlesticks which thou sawest are the 7 churches. So the 7 stars, 7 angels, all right? An angel can often be a messenger. It could.
So this is one of the things I brought up in the debate. I said to Tommy McMurtry, so in Revelation chapter 5, it talks about the kings and priests have already been mentioned. And so I'll just jump on there. So Revelation chapter 5, KJV. Just jump up here. And so when you're reading through this, you go, okay, well, this is before the 6 seals happen, before the tribulation period happens and all that. So you have, Jesus sitting on the throne. Okay. He's got the book. And it says, and when he had taken the book, the 4 beasts and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, having each one of them harps and golden vials full of odors, which are the prayers of the saints. And they sang a new song, saying, so this is a new song, it's not something that's old. Thou art worthy to take the book, so Jesus is worthy, and to open the seals thereof, for thou wast slain, and hast redeemed who? Us to God. Not them. The new versions say them. Okay. You have redeemed us to God by thy blood, out of what? Out of every kindred and tongue and people and nation. And so that they're talking about themselves from every kindred, tongue, people, and nation. So who are these people already in heaven from every kindred, tongue, and people and nation? And hast made us unto our God kings and priests, and we shall reign on the earth. So notice he's made us unto our God kings and priests. So in Revelation chapter 1, it talks about the kings and priests, that we are kings and priests. And this is one of the main teachings that I do when I preach around. We are kings and we are priests and we are prophets. We have all the Old Testament anointed class of the king, the priest, and the prophet. They are us. We have their role now because we are in Christ. And we shall reign on the earth. Notice it's we, not they shall reign on the earth. Now, if I just jump to, say, Revelation 5, I'll go 9 to 10. And I'll go to a parallel version. So the New King James should have the same, but it'll have a heap of footnotes. But let's go to, so the NIV. Whoops. New International Version. There we go. So it says, and they sang a new song saying, you are worthy to take the scroll, da da da. And it says, you purchase for God persons from every tribe. Where here it clearly says, you have redeemed us to God. Where here has persons. You have purchased for God persons from every tribe, language, and people and nation. So here it's a personal experience that they've had. They've been redeemed. Here it's, they've redeemed some people to God. And then it says, out of every tribe, language, people, and nation, you have made them. Notice that? Them. Here it has, you have made us. It's personal to these people. That's why I'm saying to Donnie and Praise I Am and these other guys, they're getting their doctrine from people who are reading the new Bibles here, because they wouldn't even engage with this. I mean, I don't know if they can engage with this because it's so damning to their position. You have made them to be a kingdom, where here it has, you have made us. And it says kings and priests, not a kingdom and priests. That's wrong. to serve our God, and says, and they will reign. Here it says, and we shall reign on the earth. So notice there's the us, and the we here. So these people are talking about themselves. Here, it's talking about someone else. So notice that. Some manuscripts say they reign, and they will reign. So it's not even pointing out any differences in the King James, whatever. It's just singing about someone else. Where in the King James, it's a personal thing. You're worthy, and they're out of every tribe and language and people and nation. So to me, the rapture's already happened. It's very clear. Pre-tribulational rapture, pre-70th week rapture, four horsemen rapture, seals rapture. They're already in heaven from every tribe, language, and people and nation. And so if you look at the next thing that's said, this is one of the things I pointed out to Tommy. Because, see, what happens there is then people say, okay, so what are you talking about? The four beasts? Are they the redeemed, here? Or the 24 elders? And so some people say, the 24 elders, where I would say the 24 elders is made up of 12 from the tribes of Israel, 12 of the apostles, because that's what it clearly says in Revelation chapter, I think it's 21. So I might even just quickly go there. Revelation 21, KJV. It talks about the gates and things like that. So it says, I had a high wall and 12 gates, and there's 12 angels, and the names wherein are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. Okay. And notice there's 12 angels there. Okay. So we'll look at that in a sec. But then it has here, and the walls and the cities have 12 foundations, and in them were found the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. You add 12 plus 12, you get 24. To me, that's how you get the 24 elders. And so pretty much what you see is there's these 12 gates, and above them it has, on one side it has the name of the apostle, and the other side it has the name of one of the tribes. So, and the thing is, when you look at what this city is, the city isn't actually like a literal city. It's actually the people. We are living stones. That's what it's talking about. So this is the bride. It's quite amazing. So, I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Read through that chapter, you will get a goosebump. So back here, we have, the 24 elders. To me, only half of them would have been redeemed from every tribe and language, people, and nation, because I believe John was looking at himself, a future form of himself that had been raptured. But then we have this concept, and this was another concept, because people are like, oh, is it the four beasts? I'm like, no, I think that was just the four beasts that mentioned in the Old Testament and everything. 24 elders, well, I believe that there were already 12 there. Another 12, the 12 disciples or the 12 apostles, had been already raptured, and they're put there. And then you have, this is what I believe is the rest of the church, because it has, and behold, so straight away they're singing this song, it's a new song. And behold, I heard a voice of many angels around the throne and the beasts. So this is talking about these beasts and the elders, 24 elders. And the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of thousands. That's a lot. Saying with a loud voice, worthy is the Lamb that was slain to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing. And so they're singing along with this whole thing. Now, if I actually didn't say the word angels here, if I said, and I beheld the voice of many Christians around the throne, you just go, oh, it's pre-trib, Now, because it says angels, most people think, okay, an angel, that's, an angel from heaven, Michael the Archangel, all this sort of stuff. But when you go through the book of Revelation, it says to the angel of the church of Ephesus, write this, to the angel of the church of this. So it's just talking about the messenger. Now, the word angelos, even in the Greek, when it talks about John the Baptist, it says, I will send my messenger before thy face. The word messenger is angelos. So was John the Baptist an angel from heaven, or he was just a messenger? And so we're all messengers. We all are preachers. We all proclaim the word of God. So it says, behold, I heard the voice of many angels. The Bible is very clear. Jesus said we shall be like angels. So we shall be as the angels. KJV. Okay, so listen to this. In the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven. In the resurrection. So the resurrection would be synonymous with the rapture. So, whose will they be in the resurrection? Well, in the resurrection, they don't get married. Okay. Nor are they given in marriage. No one says you don't get married yourself, nor does someone marry you away, but you will as the angels of God in heaven. So that's proof that the angels don't marry, and also proof that the whole Nephilim thing is just ridiculous because they don't procreate. But it's very clear once the resurrection happens, we're like angels. Then when you read through this, you're like, okay, I beheld and heard the voice of many angels around the throne, and the beasts and the elders, and the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000. So they're singing along with this whole concept, and they're talking about you've redeemed us. To me, this is pre-tribulation rapture. To me, this is very clear. And so, anyway, I'll let Tommy talk a little bit more, and then I'll finish this up.
Could be, some people believe it's referring to the pastors of those churches. Some people say, well, every church has an angel. All right. Now, at the end of the day, I'm not going to worry a whole lot about what the angel of the church is, whether it's a messenger or an actual angel, because the truth is, this passage, it's not trying to teach that every church has an angel necessarily. But I personally think it's probably just talking about the pastor, the messenger. Because of the fact, too, this letter, it's written to the 7 churches. Well, who are they probably going to give it to? They're going to give it to the pastor. And what's that pastor going to do? That passenger is going to deliver this message to the church. He's going to be the messenger. And so I personally believe it's the pastor.
And so that's where I said, well, in your Revelation series, you said the angels are probably pastors. And so is it that inconceivable to say that after the resurrection, the rapture, that these angels here could be humans? And so also there was this concept, which is in Revelation 19. Where it's I fell at his feet to worship him. So this is the angel. And he said to me, see, thou do it not, for I am thy fellow servant. So he's talking to an angel. He's gone to worship this angel, and he says, I am thy fellow servant and of thy brethren. I'm of the brethren, and have the testimony of Jesus. Worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. So to me, this looks like the angel that was guiding John through the book of Revelation, showing him visions and stuff, could be a future saint, a resurrected saint. We also see this in, I think it's the next chapter, or it might be chapter 22. Let's just look at worship. Oops. Cap lock. So it's obviously not that chapter. So it must be 22. Here it is. I fell down to worship before the feet of the angel, which showed me these things. And he saith unto me, see thou do it not, for I am thy fellow servant, and of thy brethren the prophets, and of them which keep the sayings of this book. Worship God. To me, it seems like this angel is like, it's a resurrected saint. Now that's mysterious, but it's like, yeah, it's an interesting concept to consider and to think about. So I'll let Tommy continue on a little bit more, and then we're going to shut it down.
I'm not going to make a huge deal out of it. And then, of course, the candlesticks are the churches. And I'll probably say a little more about that in the next couple of weeks, because I believe a church can have its candlestick removed. I believe that there are assemblies of believers that are out there today whose candlestick has been removed. They are called a church. They meet together like a church, but their candlestick has been removed. God no longer is using that church anymore. And if every church does have its own angel, I think when their candlestick goes, their angel goes too. That's what I personally believe, if that's the case. And I might say more about that next week. But look at Isaiah chapter 6. Or let's read verse 17 first. It says, and when I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead, and he laid his right hand upon me, saying unto me, fear not, I am the first and the last. Once again, it's all about Jesus. And then Isaiah chapter 6, go ahead and turn over there. The sight of Jesus Christ is in his heavenly form is one that brings people to their knees. It's one that's going to, knock people on their face. It's one that's going to freak the world out when they see it. And rightfully so. When Jesus Christ came to earth the first time, and he lived a life as a normal man, there was nothing special about his appearance when he was on earth the first time. But now in his glorified state, there is something very special about it. But look what it says in Isaiah 6, verse 1. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting upon a throne high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Above it stood the seraphims. Each one had 6 wings. With twain he covered his face, with twain he covered his feet, and with twain he did fly. And one cried unto another and said, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the posts of the door moved at the voice of him that cried, and the house was filled with smoke. Then said I, woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For mine eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. So the sight of Christ will cause every knee to bow. It is going to be a sight to behold. And I personally believe that this, image that John is seeing, I think is one that he had actually seen before on the Mount of Transfiguration. Look what it says in Matthew chapter 17, verse 2, says, and was transfigured before him, and his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. Right there, we see Jesus Christ, what we see in Revelation chapter 1. What happened at the Mount of Transfiguration? As he gets ready to talk to Moses and Elijah up there. And you know what? He was able to do that while he was on earth. You know why? Because Jesus was holy while he was on earth. We cannot take on our heavenly form right now. We're too dirty right now. Our vile body has not been changed yet. But Jesus was able to do that while he was walking the earth. You know why? Because Jesus was holy. Jesus never had any sin in him at all. And so notice though how it's mentioned how his face shone like the sun. Here it mentions, his face shining like the sun. And then in Daniel chapter 12, verse 1 says, and at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time, thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written book, contempt, and they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. What's going on right there? This is the rapture, all right? The Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel. Gabriel? No, Michael is the archangel. Gabriel is never referred to as the archangel.
Okay, so I'm going to leave it there because I want to actually study into that a little bit and go through that passage in Daniel, because he's saying, oh, that's the rapture. And so we just want to make sure that we're not just rushing through this just to finish the video. So we're at the 49. I'll just get rid of that there so we can see 49-minute mark. So we've got basically 10 minutes of this video to go. So that'll probably be one program, and then maybe I'll work out where I will go to next. So I might even go through some of Standing for Truth, Donnie's material, but I'm not sure. I might go through some others. So we've got some comments here. Helg says, how could pastor shepherd equal angel messenger? That does not seem to fit with New Testament language and usage. The angels of the churches were messengers who brought the epistles, letters. So I guess, yeah, it is interesting because I guess you do have John the Baptist being a messenger. I might even look up maybe gloss in Greek. In actually Blue Letter Bible, that's a good one. Strong's number 32 is angelos. Okay, so here we go. We have it appearing as angel 179 times, as messenger 7 times. So maybe I can just go this. I will send my messenger before thy face. Okay, so that's talking about John the Baptist. I will send my messenger before thy face. John the Baptist again. Luke, I will send my messenger. And sent messengers before his face as they went to the village. Okay, so these, it's interesting. He just uses angels here. Or messengers. Okay, so it's divided into 4 here. So I'll just see if there's much more that we can look at with messengers. The messenger of Satan to buffet me. It's interesting. The angelos of Satan buffeted me. I guess that would be why some Pentecostal groups say that it is the thorn in the flesh is sickness, but I don't believe that. I think it was a persecution. Fell before their throne and worshipped God. Sorry, I'm looking at a different thing. Messenger. She received the messages. So Rahab received the messengers, which are called angels, and sent them out another way. Okay, and the last one looks like it's Revelation. So I'm only just showing you where the King James does have messenger, but the reality is a lot of the time we can see that angel is actually just a messenger as well. So it might say you have been entertaining angels unaware. Or is that really talking about angels, or is it talking about messengers, of the gospel? So anyway, I'm going to finish that, but I'll answer these comments and questions, or I'll reply to them. Stevie said, Revelation is about Israel, not us. I think Revelation is for everyone, including Israel. But yeah, if you have any reason why you've said that, I'll look at that. Boulder's Lion says, okay, Nick, see you later. Hand pink waving and more Thomas Ross and the wolf, please. I'm not sure what it means, like hand pink waving. But yeah, so definitely this eschatological concept, because it's it's a concept that not everyone is gelling on, the whole post-trib pre-wrath thing, and then not everyone gels on the pre-trib thing. So people are like, I guess for some people this is sort of like, an Episcopalian debating against an Anglican, or it's like what why, but this is just where I'm at the moment, and so I'm going to be going through this. I know it's not really that popular, but I'm not really looking for popularity. I know earlier on I had who was it, Praise I Am, jumping on saying, "You've lost your salvation, Nick, for only having 2 viewers." And it's sort of like, I can understand these guys, they major in mocking, because it's the Anderson influence, I guess, the IFB influence. And it's like, oh, you've only got a few people looking. Like last night, I think there was like up to 30 people watching at one time. And some of the videos I have, up to 2,000 people have watched them and enjoyed them. But I've written a book on Revelation 16:5, the rare nomen sacrum form of the triadic declaration and all this. Who's going to read that? Just a few geeks and weirdos here and there. I'm not looking for a huge audience. I'm not going through this just going, I just want to be popular and having everything all ironed out and just keeping it down and doing shorts and all this stuff. Maybe as we go along we can do all that sort of stuff, but I'm just interested in sitting down, going through things and matching it up with the Bible. And so that's where I'm at the moment. And so Standing for Truth said earlier, here I'll help Nick get his salvation back by being the second viewer. These guys, this is the sort of the mocking that you would expect from these guys. And at the end of the day, like, really, I was thinking about it. A Seventh-day Adventist can pretty much do a creation ministry. So can a Jehovah's Witness. I mean, I've known Sevies who are really good on creationism. And, but at the end of the day, when it comes to true biblical doctrine and going through stuff, that takes a little bit more thought and a little bit more understanding. And so I don't really expect that, these guys just sort of, coming on here and show, sort of going, okay, you've only got a few viewers. Yeah, well, I'm touching on their eschatology, which shows that their eschatology isn't really popular. It's not really showing that I'm not that popular, because if I do other subjects, I get a lot more viewers. But at the end of the day, I'm not really looking for popularity. I know that these guys are trying to be controversial, bait people into things. And even if we just have a quick cursory look, like it's Standing for Truth, I'll just have a look here. Standing for Truth channel. Okay. So they've got a live thing going at the moment, but I won't jump in there. If we go to, now how do I navigate this? Let's just go to videos. The oldest. Let's just see what's getting promoted by this channel. Because I was like, okay, I'll start from the beginning. Stephen Anderson. Why, if they don't agree with this guy, why aren't they deleting these videos? You know what I mean? But I think, and look at the views, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, let's just mock people for not having people in their stream. But it's like, Stephen Anderson, why would you still have him there? Why wouldn't you delete that if you're trying to separate? There's Stephen Anderson again. Stephen Anderson again. Stephen Anderson again. And so, Stephen Anderson again. So as you can see, these guys have a lot of influence by Stephen Anderson, and you can't get away from that. It's just the facts. And so, Tommy McMurtry is, up until recently, has been best buddies with Stephen Anderson. So it's like the best thing besides Stephen Anderson. It's like, I can't believe it's not butter. You know, it's. I remember that I can't believe it's not Hitler. They had. If you ever look up Uncyclopedia, it's quite hilarious. But okay, so Helg says John the Baptist was a messenger who brought the message about Christ. Yes, the angel messenger of Satan may be an angel who stirred up persecution against Paul. That's exactly what I believe, Helg. So that's an emoji. Oh yeah, the pink hand waving. I thought it was like, oh, you know, pink lefto, blah blah blah. So anyway, but yeah, so I will be going through the Thomas Ross stuff and James White stuff. So I guess you don't see it. LOL. No, I don't. So anyway, thanks for joining us, guys. God bless you, and we'll see you next time I do a video.